In the dark, half-empty room, someone's heavy breathing could be heard. A large white flower lay abandoned on the floor. A man's face was distorted into a terrible grimace. He was wounded and blood was slowly dripping down his cheeks. The white petals of the chrysanthemum were stained with drops of scarlet blood. There was an ominous silence all around. There were many mutilated bodies lying around in the spacious room. The figure of an exhausted guy towered over them. His hands and face were covered in the blood of his defeated opponents. Trying to come to his senses, he thought that he didn't care what others thought of him. Looking around with a furious gaze, the guy swore that he would become the one to kill his father. It was an ordinary, quiet day. As expected at this time, lessons were in progress at school. A guy was trying hard to solve a problem, but his rude classmates kept trying to distract him by asking what he was having for lunch today. The guy tried to ignore them. He was not the only victim of bullies. A group of guys who sat at the other end of the class did not miss the opportunity to humiliate their classmates. The main one was indignant and said that the guy who had just left the class irritated him, so he ordered his friend to bring him to the back of the store. The guy didn't understand why this was necessary. The leader, as if casually showing off his tattoos, replied that he wanted to get money out of him. To this, the second bully said that that classmate lived with his father in some poor apartment, and therefore he definitely wouldn't have any money. But the main one didn't agree with this. He said that the poorer the family was, the more the parents wanted to value and pamper their child. Besides, no one would do anything to them if they took money from him. The bully continued to say that the classmates' parents had no power whatsoever, and their whole purpose in existence was to be used by others. The scoundrel rubbed his hands greedily and was already anticipating how he would beat all the change out of that loser. The class was immediately remembered for the loud laughter of the hooligans, who felt they could act with impunity. The laughter suddenly stopped when the main character appeared behind the bully. The leader looked at him with contempt. He asked what the guy wanted and assumed that he wanted to give his pocket money to the hooligans. The next moment, the protagonist squeezed the pen in his hand with all his might and pounced on the leader of the villains. A second later, the hooligan was lying on the floor, writhing in pain and holding his bloody eye. This could have passed without a trace. The guy was called to the teacher's room. The teacher could not believe what had happened because the main character had behaved diligently for these 3 years and had not even been a victim of bullying. The main character sat quietly with his bloody hands folded. He didn't say a word. The teacher was indignant and said that he would not be able to help the boy if he remained silent. He continued to say that this situation could not be resolved unless the guy explained his actions. Finally, the main character quietly said under his breath that the hooligans were too noisy. The teacher did not hear this and asked again what the guy said. Kong Pil-do looked at the teacher from under his forehead and repeated that he hit the scoundrel because they were making a lot of noise. The guy gave off an evil aura, and his bloody hands only strengthened it. After some time, the guy returned to class, but now he had to come to terms with the fact that all his classmates were actively discussing him. They said the guy did it because he was trying to study and the hooligans were making too much noise. Everyone considered him a psychopath and assumed that the main character was so active in his studies in order to get into the best university. Pil-do was constantly followed by the gazes of his classmates until he graduated from high school. After entering the university, this stopped. Now absolutely no one paid attention to him, but the main character himself did not need it. He was constantly thinking about what he had to care about, what others thought of him, and what methods he used, because if he wanted something, he would get it no matter what. The man in the suit timidly entered the office and informed his boss that it was time for his meeting. The man replied that he would be there soon. This boss was Kong Pil-do, who over the years had already become a prosecutor. The main character worked for several years in a multi-story building with many windows, over which the South Korean flag fluttered. The only source of light in the empty office was a projector. The meeting concerned the company Manhwa Group. Kong Pil-do told his colleagues that it was a new company, and therefore not everyone could know about it. This company was engaged in the credit business, but began to develop in other sectors. The main character continued to say that last year this company received 500 billion in net profit. He also added that despite the successes, it continued to grow very quickly. The man who sat at the head of the table thought for a while, but soon said that he did not understand what the problem was. Kong Pil-do explained that this company looked law-abiding on the outside, but in reality it was not, and it was definitely not an ordinary company. The main character said that the heads of this company took over local bandit groups in order to expand their influence and power. The main problem was that as the company grew, so did the number of crimes it committed. Kong Pil-do said that they regularly blackmail and attack those who interfere with their business. At the same time, The company did not hesitate to hire bandits and kill its competitors. The protagonist went on to say that there was a reason why they could continue to expand their influence despite committing all these crimes. After all, the person who supported this company was a member of the Assembly Association named Kan Il-do. Technically, this person was the owner of Manhwa Group and was involved in all the mentioned incidents related to violation of the law. Colleagues immediately began to talk among themselves because Kang Il-do was one of the presidential candidates. After listening to Kang Pil-do's report, the chief suggested ending the meeting here. After that, she turned to the main character and said that he would like to talk to him alone. Everyone quickly left the office, leaving Kang Pil-do alone with the boss. The main character stood humbly and waited for the boss to start the conversation. Finally, he asked whether Kang Pil-do was doing all this because of a promotion or whether he had received an offer to search and collect information. The protagonist denied it. Then the boss asked what the matter was and why the guy was so obsessed with it. Kang Pil-do remembered how some woman asked him the same question. Then he answered that it was not an obsession because it was just his job. The woman lowered her head and said with annoyance that she knew this, but she wished the guy would turn a blind eye to it. To this, the main character replied that someone had to do it, after which he said that he was busy and asked the woman to go home. The woman continued to beg the protagonist to give up this business. She was very worried and nervously rubbed her hands trying to find the words to convince Kang Pil-do. Added to this was the biting of the lip. The woman assumed that the worst could happen, although she knew that Kang Pil-do would not leave this matter. The main character looked at the woman with confusion and fear, trying to understand what she meant. The next moment, she looked into the boy's eyes and asked him to listen to his mother for once. Kang Pil-do looked at the floor and answered his boss that he had no other reasons because he was just doing his job. The man said that he knew this and praised the guy for doing his job very well, but said that there were other people working there too. He explained that Kang Il-do was a presidential candidate, and if something went wrong, the entire prosecutor's office could end up on bad terms with the future president. Kang Pil-do continued to listen silently to his boss. The man assumed that the protagonist didn't care about all this. He continued to say that the lives of all his subordinates were at stake, so he suggested that the main character leave everything as it was. Suddenly, the conversation was interrupted because someone called the boss. The contact was signed as Mr. Khan. The man quickly grabbed the phone to answer the call. The man stood up from the table and cheerfully greeted the person who called him. He good-naturedly thanked his interlocutor for the call because he was sure that he had many important things to do. The boss reported that he had already spoken with the main characters and everything would be finished right here, so the interlocutor did not have to worry about anything. The man said that he would tell us everything in more detail during a personal meeting. Kang Pil-do realized that it was useless to continue the conversation, and so he headed towards the exit of the office. Suddenly, the boss's expression changed. He seemed to be worried about something and therefore asked his interlocutor to repeat what he had said. After that, he looked after the main character as he left and said that of course he would tell him what he heard. The man turned to Kang Pil-do and timidly asked if he had received the message yet. "I'm trying to find softer words." The boss announced that the main character's mother had died. Kang Pil-do was horrified by what he heard and, unable to restrain himself, looked angrily at the man. Late in the evening, several black cars were parked near an inconspicuous building. The spacious room was lavishly furnished with flowers and other ceremonial decorations. A sign in the middle of the room stated that, at the request of the family, visitors were not being accepted. In the corner next to the bronze bowl, a small candle burned, which deepened the silence that reigned. Among a lush bouquet of white chrysanthemums stood a photograph of the main character's deceased mother. Several stern men in black suits, on orders from their superior, were hastily removing the funeral bikes. One of the men asked if everything would be okay, since not even 3 days had passed since the funeral. The chief replied that it was enough that they had organized all of this, and those who were at the top didn't care. One of the men, holding a portrait of a woman in his hands, asked the leader what he was supposed to do with it. The man began to scold his subordinate for such stupid questions and suggested that he was going to keep it in his room and worship it, after which he told him to simply throw away the photograph. The man obeyed the chief's order and immediately threw the portrait on the floor. The work continued. Despite the photograph lying on the floor, the men walked over it without paying any attention. Everyone headed towards the exit to throw away the wreaths and finish their work as quickly as possible. Suddenly, someone passing the others headed back into the depths of the room. The boss noticed this and looked at the unfamiliar guy with bewilderment. Following the boss, all the subordinates also looked at the stranger, who was walking towards the portrait of the woman. The stranger stopped at the photograph. Its frame was broken and covered in dirt, One of the men said loudly that they were not receiving guests and therefore the guy had to leave. It was Kang Pildu who looked with annoyance at how these scoundrels treated the memory of his mother, literally trampling on it. The man continued to say that they were busy and asked the stranger who he was. Instead of introducing himself, the protagonist threw his pass to the prosecutor's office at the feet of the villains. Seeing him, all the men became tense and angry because they realized who was standing in front of them. Kang Pildu began to say that he wanted to know why his mother died. For this reason, some time ago, he came to the morgue to find out everything himself. But the guy assumed that the big shots had already had their hand in this matter, because after questioning the pathologist, Kang Pildu was unable to find out anything. However, he was lucky enough to find an autopsy report. It had a sticker on it that said the woman had committed suicide. Kang Pildu knew that people could lie, so he no doubt quietly took a few sheets of this report for himself. Hiding them in the pocket of his jacket, he thought that documents never lied. All the villains listened attentively to the main character's story, anticipating what would happen next. Kang Pildu continued to say that the men did their job very unprofessionally. After looking at the stolen documents, the main character discovered that there were numerous stab wounds on the woman's body. He asked the bandits if all this was so necessary. Kang Pildu was sure that judging by what they did to her, she couldn't even call for help. The men immediately remembered how not long ago they had mercilessly killed that woman. Kang Pildu continued to say that the scoundrels must have been stabbing her without stopping. But even so, the woman still had the strength to grab some small shiny object. After that, she put it in her mouth so that it would not fall into the hands of her killers. The men were surprised that she was still alive, and the woman understood that her end had come. The boss ordered his subordinates to finish with her and get out of here, because someone was already waiting for them outside. The next moment, the men dealt several more powerful blows in order to finish what they had started. Kang Pildu guessed that the bandits thought they had done a great job. The guy continued saying that they missed something because the woman swallowed something while she was bleeding, and this small object got stuck in her throat. At that moment, the angry leader silently looked at his subordinate and called him over to him. The man understood the order of the chief and went to the main character. He demanded that he shut up and asked why he interfered in their affairs, because he didn't even have a warrant. Suddenly, the man grabbed Kang Pildu by the shoulder and asked if he had any proof that they did it. After that, the bandit rudely ordered the protagonist to leave here while he was still kind, but instead, Kang Pildu took the scoundrel by the finger. The next moment, the main character with a sharp movement twisted the bandit's finger, breaking it. The man was unable to restrain himself and therefore screamed loudly in pain while looking at his broken finger. But that was not the end. Kang Pildu decided not to stop, and so he swung his leg. A moment later, the main character attacked the villain, hitting him hard in the face. The man flew back a decent distance. The chief looked at his subordinate with bewilderment, as if condemning him for losing. After that, he turned to the main character and said that he had made a big mistake. The leader pulled out a sharp folding knife and prepared to deal with his opponent. The evil man swung his arm sharply and tried to attack the main character. Kang Pildu reacted in time and threw a stack of documents at the scoundrel in order to obstruct his view. The next moment, the protagonist managed to deftly dodge the knife blow and attack his opponent. The leader flew back and now lay unconscious. Kang Pildu said that the bandits had made a mistake. The defeated enemy showed no signs of life, and a small brooch with the coat of arms of their criminal clan was stuck in his forehead. Kang Pildu turned to the remaining bandits and said that he no longer wanted to deal with them legally. The bandits were not at all frightened by what happened to their comrades. They were determined to deal with the impudent guy. The main character continued to say that from now on, he would do everything his own way, and anyone who stood in his way would die. Several worried men sat silently in the office because they were about to have a serious conversation with the boss. Kang Taegu, who was the third son of the Manhwa group, said that he heard that the prosecutor beat everyone at the funeral, and he couldn't believe that they weren't going to do anything about it. Kang Mu, who was the second son, said that this could have a bad effect on the presidential election and asked if something could be done before it got worse. Kang Chawu was the first son of the company. He said that his brothers were right and they shouldn't have just sat and watched. After that, he turned to the man who was sitting in the dark corner of the room and asked what they were supposed to do with Kang Pildu. This man was their father. He remembered how he trained his children to be strong and ruthless. However, he said that there were no exceptions even for his child. Therefore, he ordered his sons to kill Kang Pildu, who was their brother. Then Khan Ildo said that this is exactly how they treated everyone who stood in their way. Late evening, the patrons of a small cafe were arguing about how they should divide the common bill. One of them was surprised because he knew that his comrade had received a promotion and therefore had to pay more. The man replied that his friend would be happy with what he received, since he wasn't going to leave more than 10,000 won here. The friend noted that he hadn't changed at all since school. The man promised that next time he would treat him to something better. The second question the man asked was why rich guys were always selfish when it came to money. Suddenly, someone walked past the company. One of the men thought that he knew this guy and therefore turned around to confirm his guess. A moment later, he turned to his comrades and asked if they recognized this guy. The man reminded them that in the 12th grade, the boy had hit a bully in the eye with his pen, saying that he was too noisy. One of the men said that he remembered him and added that the guy became a prosecutor, and therefore it was unclear why he lived in such a place. The second man couldn't believe it and assumed that his friend had made a mistake, after which he asked if his friends remembered the guy's nickname. Everyone remembered that for his actions, the main character was called a psychopath at school. The man in glasses was silent all this time and only looked after Kong Pil-do. It was strange to see completely intact glasses on the ground among a pile of garbage. Some guy was being harassed by hooligans. He was scared and promised that he would bring what he promised tomorrow. The leader thought that his victim took him for an idiot because he had already said that he would stick a cigarette in the poor guy's eye if he didn't bring it today. The villains continued to mock the boy despite his requests to forgive him. Suddenly, a teacher came out from around the corner and was surprised that the students were still there, although the break had long since ended. To top it all off, the boys were also smoking. The teacher ordered everyone to immediately go to the teacher's room. The main bully explained that he was just asking his friend if he could borrow his gym clothes because he had physical education in the next class. He also said that they were already late for the next lessons and therefore asked the teacher to close their eyes this time, and at the same time he casually showed off his tattoo. The teacher knew what kind of tattoo it was and therefore immediately got into a mess because he didn't want to get hurt himself. Unfortunately for the boy, the teacher only told the bullies to prepare for class earlier next time. After that, he left. The villain looked at his victim and laughed because he had no one else to rely on. The guy himself understood that he would never be able to escape from these hooligans. After this, the leader turned to the boy and said that the teacher asked him to look after him because he had a poor family. The scoundrel asked if the boy's family received support for low-income families, after which he said that he could make the boy's school life more comfortable. After that, he started asking about the boy's mother and said that she would like her son to see the brighter side of the world. Finally, the villains began to leave, crushing the glasses that were lying on the ground along the way. The boss asked the guy why he left his glasses under his feet. The other hooligans laughed and said that he already had poor vision, and now it would be even worse for him. The guy was left completely alone and silently thought about what had just happened to him, trying to come to his senses. Suddenly, someone came out of the school. The guy was holding a large bag in his hands and was heading towards the trash bins. He turned to the beaten guy and asked him to step aside. It was Kong Pil-do. He asked the guy again to move away and not to disturb him because he wanted to throw out the trash. The guy silently moved aside and began looking for something in his backpack. While rummaging through his briefcase, he asked what was the point of throwing away this bag. After all, the trash that needed to be removed remained as is. An unexpected guy took a stationery knife out of his pencil case. After that, he released the sharp blade and looked at his wrist. The guy thought that he would like someone to know that he chose death because of those hooligans. He also would like someone to know that when he lived, he was treated like trash and not a human being. The guy had already put the knife to his hand and was about to commit something irreparable because he thought that thanks to this, everyone would finally find out. The boy was scared and he clearly didn't want to do it, but he didn't see any other way out. Kang Pil-do didn't pay attention to this and calmly returned to school. An unexpected voice addressed the guy and said that no one would know even if he did what he had planned. Pil-do's voice, who also added that he was getting rid of the trash because he was about to start cleaning. A loud, prolonged scream was heard in the classroom. The students quickly ran to the classroom to see what the reason was. The classmates were very surprised to see Kong Pil-do and thought that he was a real psychopath, although no one could have thought of this before. Kong Pil-do heard what his classmates were saying about him, and at that moment he decided that he would no longer care about the opinions of others. The man in glasses continued to remember that on that day, the main character really did remove the trash from his life. He was amazed because his classmate didn't even blink when he stuck in the pen. The man with glasses kept wondering why Kong Pil-do did this, and couldn't believe that it was only because of him. Then he thought that he should have told his friends about everything, but he couldn't, because he was afraid of the main character no less than the others. And even now, seeing the guy after so many years, he was afraid to even approach and say hello to him. Therefore, The man in glasses only silently followed the main character with his gaze. He did not dare to speak to him, and as if in annoyance, followed his friends. Meanwhile, Kang Pil-du slowly climbed the steps. These places were familiar to him. Despite the fact that it was not yet late, there were almost no people on the street. Only the presence of a woman who was waiting for someone indicated that other people lived in this disadvantaged area. Kang Pil-du entered the entrance and began to climb the stairs while the woman was worried because her friend said that she would be home but never called back. The woman was already starting to get nervous, and so she decided to call her friend, but she didn't answer. Meanwhile, the main character had already climbed to the right floor and approached one of the doors that had a fancy electronic lock. For a moment, Kang Pil-du looked at him with distrust, as if he was anticipating something bad. Still, he made up his mind and opened the door. The light from the entrance instantly burst into the dark apartment. There was deathly silence all around, and only the guy's heavy steps broke it. Without taking off his shoes, Kang Pil-du walked forward cautiously, because the feeling of impending danger still had not left him. The next moment, a man ran out from behind a dark corner towards the main character and tried to attack him. It seemed that the stranger had succeeded in what he had planned, but Kang Pil-du did not make a sound. Suddenly, blood began to drip onto the floor. It was still unclear to whom it belonged. It turned out that the stranger attacked the main character with a knife in order to kill him. But Kang Pil-du managed to grab the blade with his hands in time, which made it impossible to avoid cuts. The guy turned to the attacker and told him to take off his shoes the next time he entered someone else's house so that it wouldn't be obvious that he was there. After this, the main character, with one deft movement, directed the blade to the side and released it in order to free his hands. After this, he resolutely grabbed the discouraged attacker who could do nothing more. A second later, Kang Pil-du threw the man over himself, breaking a small wooden table with his body. Due to the injuries he sustained, the attacker could no longer move and only made some awkward sounds. The main character leaned towards him to check if the man was still alive, but it turned out that this was not the case. Suddenly, the guy turned to someone and asked who sent him. It turned out that there was another armed man in the apartment. He was nervous and asked why the main character needed an answer, because he would soon die anyway. Hearing this, Kang Pil-du approached the uninvited guest without further ado. The next moment, the man fell to his knees and blood began to pour onto the wooden floor. The attacker held his throat and tried to close the wound, from which blood was gushing in all directions. At this time, the third uninvited guest was sitting calmly in the kitchen and drinking something from the neck of a bottle. Kang Pil-du approached the man, throwing the knife he had taken from his opponent along the way. The man grinned and assumed that it was Kang Pil-du standing in front of him. He couldn't believe that all that was in the prosecutor's refrigerator was a bottle of soju. After this, the man got up from the table and walked towards the main character. "Look at your subordinates." He was surprised and asked if the guy was really a prosecutor, because he thought it would end quickly, but the guy turned out to be no weakling. Then the man decided that things wouldn't work out that way, and he would have to negotiate a new price with his employer. Suddenly, the door to the bathroom began to slowly and creakingly open. A bright light immediately penetrated into the dark corridor. There was someone's lifeless body lying in the bathroom. The man said that he shouldn't have trusted the Koreans because he wouldn't come out on top if he took into account the cleaning fee. It was a wounded woman who could barely breathe. She remained conscious with her last strength and looked at the main character. Kang Pil-du was very surprised to see her there and asked the man if this woman was part of their deal. He proudly stated that he had brought her from the floor below and had to spend quite a long time messing around with her. The man continued to say that he had to do it because he needed an alibi for the prosecutor. His plan was to frame the corrupt prosecutor Kang Pil-du for allegedly attempting to sexually assault a woman. The man said with a smile that this news would have made it to the front page of tomorrow's newspaper, after which he asked if the main character liked it. The guy replied that the man lacked creativity because in our time it was not enough. The smile from the stranger's face immediately disappeared. Kang Pil-du smiled slyly and began to think about how the man should have done things differently. The main character looked at the man with a crazy look and said that he could kill the girl's parents to get at least some attention. The man assumed that he was not the only trash here, after which he said that he would ask his employer to pay him more. Some man was sitting in the main office of Manhwa Group and saying that the person he hired would handle this task without any problems if he was paid. The man thought that the man had named a fairly high price, but assumed that he had already tasted money. The man continued to say that nevertheless, one should take care of the consequences, because one word was enough to bury everyone alive. After this, he began to be indignant because the son who became a prosecutor should have provided solid support to his father, but instead dared to betray him. After that, he turned to Kang Il-do, who was standing silently by the window, and asked what he thought about this. The man added that if something goes wrong, even a member of the National Assembly will not be able to escape responsibility because those above him will no longer sit and watch. Kang Il-do seemed to be hurt by these words, because the head of the company slightly turned to the man and did not listen to him more attentively. The old man, trying to correct his situation, said that since the leader had climbed to this peak from the very bottom, he knew better than anyone what would happen in the end. After this, Kang Il-do turned to the man and looked at him with a stern gaze. The old man continued to say that he lived in the head of all the best, so he asked not to take his words to heart. He also added that the presidential elections were just around the corner, and it was necessary to complete all the affairs more carefully so that the gentleman could bury his past. The head of the company approached the old man and looked at him with a piercing gaze for a while. Finally, he smiled and said that in order to bury his past, he would have to dig up all of South Korea. Hearing this, the old man loudly declared that he was not here to joke. Kang Il-do said that he too had not climbed to this peak with the help of jokes and offered the old man to teach him how to survive at the bottom that he had mentioned. The chief said it was simple and explained that he never showed mercy to anyone who stood in his way. The man looked angrily at the old man and added that he made no exceptions even for his own family. The old man opened his eyes wide in fear and began to sweat. Kang Il-do approached him closer and closer and said that Kang Il-do was not someone the old man could take care of. Therefore, the head of the company ordered the old man not to get in his way until he buried him alive. After this, Kang Il-do asked the assembly member if he understood him well. The old man was shaking with fear and stuttering. He was barely able to answer the question, saying that he understood everything. He tried to justify himself by saying that he did it for Kang Il-do's sake, but admitted that he hadn't thought about it beforehand. Sweating from excitement, the old man picked up the phone because he intended to tell the mercenaries to leave Kang Il-do. At this time, chaos and devastation reigned in the main character's apartment. All the furniture was broken and things were scattered across the floor. The oppressive silence was broken by an unexpected phone call. Unfortunately, the owner of the phone was no longer able to answer. Kang Il-do was expecting this call, and so he picked up the phone from the floor without any hesitation. As soon as he answered, the voice on the other end asked why he answered so late, and then asked what happened to Kang Il-do. The old man was very surprised when he heard an unfamiliar voice that clearly did not belong to the person he hired. The man continued to listen attentively to what Kang Il-do was telling him. A moment later, the old man timidly turned to the head of the company and said that the main character wanted to talk to him. Kang Il-do took the phone. His entire arm was covered in scars that reminded him of his past. The man told his son that he had listened to him attentively, and at the same time he headed towards the window. Kang Il-do asked if the boy hadn't studied to become a prosecutor, but he still wasn't smart enough to understand one thing. The man continued to say that if the main character didn't have enough brains, then he could at least do as he was told. Then he would be able to get the position of Attorney General. Others could not even dream of such a thing, so the head of the company did not understand why Kang Il-do went against him. The man looked at the city at night. The bright lights of the metropolis offered great prospects but did not answer the questions that interested him. Without waiting for a response from his son, Kang Il-do assumed that it was all because of the incident with his mother. Another area of the city where the main character was now located looked completely joyless and dark. As he climbed the stairs, Kang Il-do guessed that his father had no idea what his mother's death meant to him. The massive iron door creaked open, allowing the guy to step out onto the roof. The protagonist continued to say that the only reason he could endure everything up until now was because his mother played the role of his pin. Kang Il-do looked at the city at night. In the distance, the blue lights of a rich metropolis were visible, but now he was in a completely different world. The main character continued to say that everything changed after someone decided to take his mother away from him. After this, Kang Il-do turned his gaze towards an inconspicuous little window in which a light was burning. It was his apartment, where a real battle had recently taken place, as evidenced by the scattered and broken things. The man who was paid to kill the main character was now covered in his own blood and could barely move. In addition, he was tightly tied to the battery, which did not give him a chance to escape. Suddenly, the man smelled a strange odor. He recognized it and was horrified. It was the smell of household gas that was quickly coming out of the damaged hose. The gas quickly filled one room after another. The man desperately tried to free himself, but all his attempts ended in failure. The next moment, a spark shot out from a damaged electrical wire and ignited the gas. This caused a huge explosion that burned the villain alive. The main character watched everything that was happening from the side. He never had a moment of doubt that everything would work out as he planned. This explosion was visible from the skyscraper where Khan Ildo was located. The bright red fire stood out against the blue lights of the metropolis. The main character told his father that now he would be able to see his determination. After this, he threatened to kill everyone who was involved in his mother's death. The guy looked at the fire with a crazy look and said that he would not make exceptions for anyone, not even for his family. Canildo listened silently to his son and also stared intently at the fire. The next moment the man laughed and said that the boy had finally started to act like his child. The head of the company suggested that his son feel the pain that would be in the path he had chosen. Kang Pil-du no longer heard these words as he had thrown away the phone. Sometime later, firefighters arrived and immediately began to eliminate the consequences of the explosion. The upset woman leaned over her daughter and asked if she was okay and what had happened to her. The girl was also upset about what happened to her, but was glad that it was all over. The woman did not move for a moment and asked the doctors if everything would be okay with her daughter. The man said that there was no need to worry anymore because the person who reported the incident provided the girl with excellent first aid. The next moment, several police officers approached the victim to ask her about what had happened. One of them asked the girl for cooperation and then asked if there was anyone else at the crime scene besides these three people. The girl says that at first there were three of them, but she couldn't remember their faces because she was very scared. She continued to say that later another person came. The policeman immediately asked the girl if she remembered what he looked like. The girl said that it was a young man with black hair and in a suit. She continued to remember what the fourth person looked like, but suddenly she was stunned. The girl remembered what had happened in the apartment not long ago while she was lying in the bathroom, unable to get out. Kang Pil-du pounced on his opponent with extraordinary fury, not giving him a chance to attack back. Each blow of the main character was unusually strong and guaranteed him victory in this fight. After a while, it was all over. Kang Pil-du leaned over the lifeless body of his opponent and tried to catch his breath. His hand was still tense because the guy still didn't believe that it was all over. Suddenly, he turned around sharply and looked at the girl with a crazy look. She was very scared of those furious red eyes because she didn't yet know that the worst was already behind her. As he was leaving, the main character thought that he didn't care what the whole world thought about him because he himself knew that he was a bad son. Night in a large metropolis was not a time for rest. Bright lights of advertising signs were burning everywhere, and various recreational establishments were starting their work. At the head of the table sat Kang Tae-gu, surrounded by his loyal subordinates. He was indignant that his brother had decided to speak out against the company. The boy remembered that even when Kang Pil-du was little, he had such mischievous eyes, and in the end, he caused such a big stir. The third son continued to tell his subordinates that, whatever the case, this incident was a great opportunity for them. The guy said he hadn't planned to do anything memorable before the election, but it changed everything, and even his older brothers were walking on thin ice. Kang Tae-gu was worried that his father was upset about all this, and so they had to take out Pil-du first. The boy believed that his father would now know who was the one who carried all the weight on himself and suggested that his comrades try to justify his hopes. One of the subordinates asked whether the head of the company would be angry if they made any drastic steps at such a delicate time, and suggested waiting at least until the elections were over. Kang Tae-gu replied that it was precisely because of this lazy attitude that they were now in this situation. In addition, the guy was indignant that his brothers received affiliate companies only because they were born before him, and he was already tired of doing her dirty work. Kang Tae-gu believed that he had only one way to advance to the headquarters, and that was to use Kang Pil-du. A surveillance camera captured a woman appearing on a deserted street. She constantly looked around and seemed afraid that someone might see her here. As soon as the woman noticed the surveillance camera, she looked at it with contempt, because she already guessed who was watching her. This video was sent to the main character by an unknown person. The guy immediately realized that it was filmed not long before the death of his mother. Kang Pil-du decided to come to the same place in order to find out the reason why she decided to come here. The main character looked up with a serious expression and thought about something. That same surveillance camera was still working and was currently pointed straight at the guy. For some time, the main character stood in place and waited for the signal. He knew that as soon as he was noticed, something would happen. Kang Pil-du noticed a sign hanging on the building's facade that was glowing brightly. A moment later, it suddenly went out. This was the very same signal. A man warned his subordinates to be careful because if they damaged the goods, they would not get a good price for them. Several men were dragging a man into the entrance. The chief continued to say that they would come for him tonight, so they had to start work right now. The main character watched everything that was happening from a dark alley. and humbly waited for what would happen next. A loud dog bark was heard from the depths of the dark basement. One of the doors was open. A bright light from the room illuminated the dark corridor. As they approached, the dog's barking grew louder. The black dog bared its sharp teeth and growled furiously at someone. The naked man was on his knees and begging for mercy. The bandit with the bat in his hand said that someone might think that they forced him to do this. After that, he handed his victim a document which stated that in case of non-payment of interest, she would pay the full amount, including the principal, with her organs. Afterwards, he said that the man himself signed this document. The debtor did not deny it, but did not understand how it was possible to take all his organs at once, because then he would die. After that, he said that if the creditors could give him another chance, he would definitely return the money by the next month. The man with the bat didn't respond to this and just looked at the dog, which was still barking. Without saying a word, he suddenly walked towards the animal. His subordinates looked at him with incomprehension. Approaching the dog as close as possible, the man swung his bat. The next moment, the animal began to whine pitifully, after which it became completely quiet. The debtor, seeing this, was very scared. After this, the main bandit put a bloody bat to the man's forehead. The bandit asked for forgiveness and said that because the dog kept barking, he did not hear what the debtor said to him and asked him to repeat what he said. With a trembling voice, the man said once again that if they gave him another chance, he would definitely pay back for a long time. The main bandit was not satisfied with this answer. He swung his bat again and said that these damn dogs did not listen to him at all. Suddenly, someone else entered the room. His steps echoed throughout the room. One of the bandits, seeing the stranger, asked who he was and what he was doing here. Kang Pil-du looked around and saw several iron cages containing dogs. The main character asked the bandits not to pay attention to him and continue their business because he was only here to check something. The same bandit asked if the guy hadn't seen that they were working here and added that when they were free they would call him, but for now he had to get out of here. The bandit continued to say that the auction would start this evening, and besides the stranger, there were many more buyers, so the guy had to leave. Kang Pil-du calmly replied that he would leave here only after he finished his business here. The man with the bat asked what the guy wanted to check here and added that the goods had only arrived today and were still quite fresh. Kang Pil-du replied that he was not interested in human organs, as he wanted to look at the CCTV camera. For some time, the bandits looked at the main character with bewilderment, not believing that he only needed a camera and not their goods. The next moment, the men laughed loudly at the naivety of the guy who thought that he could just come and ask them for something. The boss continued to say that if the client wanted to look at the surveillance cameras, they could of course show them to him, but not for free. The man explained that today they were short of goods and therefore offered the guy to give them one of them in exchange for the footage from the cameras. Suddenly, a bandit with a huge sledgehammer appeared behind Kang Pil-du, intending to kill him with one blow. The main character reacted in time and took just one step to the side and was able to avoid the fatal blow. After this, the guy suddenly grabbed his opponent by the jacket so that he could not avoid his attack. Kang Pil-du held the bandit, who didn't understand anything, tightly, while swinging his leg hard and preparing to strike. The next moment, the protagonist hit the man in the face with his knee with all his might. This sent the villain flying back with a loud crash and hitting the wall, dropping his sledgehammer in the process. An iron chain with a dog collar fell right next to him. The main character bent down to pick it up because he thought he would still need it. Turning to the bandits, Kang Pil-du said that he expected that such scoundrels would not listen to him if he was kind. Wrapping the chain around his fist, the guy said that he didn't need everyone and he would only spare one guy who would tell him everything. After this, the bandits immediately forgot about the debtor and rushed forward to attack the impudent guy. The man thought that this was a good chance for him to hide and quickly crawled to a safe distance. From behind the wall, he watched in surprise as the main character confronted several opponents at once. Suddenly, one of the villains fell right next to the man. He was seriously injured and could no longer continue the fight. A moment later, another bandit who had been hit by a baseball bat joined him. The man continued to watch the fight and could not believe that one guy was able to resist them all. The leader of the bandits lay on the floor and frantically kicked his legs as if something was preventing him from getting up. The reason for this was the main character, who chained the soul of his enemy, not giving him a chance to escape. A moment later, the leader's legs stopped moving and he took the last breath of his life. After confirming that the enemy was no longer a threat to him, Kang Pil-du breathed a sigh of relief. After that, the guy picked up a bloody baseball bat from the floor because the main thing was still ahead. He approached two bandits who were luckier than their comrades. Looking at the men with a stern look, he said that he needed only one and therefore asked which of them would tell him everything. One of the scoundrels tried to explain that they couldn't do that because if they revealed information about the clients, they would die, and it was better for the guy to take their money. Kong Pildu was not satisfied with this answer, so he decided to immediately punish the intractable bandit. The second scoundrel, not wanting to share the fate of his comrade, immediately pointed his finger towards one of the doors, after which he said in a trembling voice that there was a camera control room behind it. Kong Pildu looked in the right direction. There was no emotion on his face, but his eyes were burning with rage and impatience to find out about everything as soon as possible. There was a sign on the inconspicuous iron door stating that entry was prohibited to outsiders. The room that was hidden behind this door was strange. On the shelves were many flasks with human eyes and formalin. There were bloody bandages scattered around, and surgical instruments were neatly stacked on a small table, ready for use. A man was sitting at a table listening to loud music on wireless headphones and not paying any attention to what was happening outside. On the man's desk were neatly laid out medical documents, ink, and human eyes in a special metal tray. The big man was doing his job with passion, trying to achieve the best result. He held a human eye in his hand and tried to depict its natural appearance in as much detail as possible. One awkward movement instantly ruined the long and painstaking work, which made the man tense up. Without a moment's hesitation, he threw the failed products aside with the other equally imperfect eye prostheses. Kong Pildu entered the room and looked around, saying that he heard that the surveillance cameras were being controlled here. The floor in the room was stained with blood and shards of broken glass crunched underfoot. Kong Pildu was surprised that this place was filled with prosthetics and did not understand what kind of place it was. After this, the guy added that he was in a bit of a hurry. The man listened to him attentively but did not answer. Kong Pildu directly asked where the CCTV footage was. The man thought for a moment and said in surprise that the main character had not changed at all since the last time they met. Wiping his prosthesis with a bloody robe, the man continued to say that he understood the situation that Kong Pildu was in, but asked him to at least say hello first. Having received no response from the main character, the man continued saying that he would be sad if he did not remember him, since only a few years had passed. After that, the man assumed that it was because he had changed a little, but he remembered Kang Pildu well. He greeted his old acquaintance and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The main character looked angrily at the man and already understood that he would not be able to get the recordings from the cameras quickly. Having put the eye prosthesis in place, the man with a sly smile asked how the guy had chewed after turning him into a one-eyed invalid. A man stood calmly on the street and exhaled cigarette smoke with great pleasure. He was surprised that there was much more goods than was said. His partner said that something had happened in that building and suggested turning a blind eye to it. The man said that the surgeon burst into the building demanding one eye, because that was his method of work. The man continued to say that no matter what, the surgeon always kept one eye. His friend confirmed this and said that this psycho was literally obsessed with eyeballs. Looking at the mutilated corpses, the man said that they were going to joke with the surgeon, and that's why they ended up like this. He also added that the surgeon pulled out all their eyes without anesthesia and took 3 days to clean up. The second man did not understand how long he would continue to do this. His partner replied that this would not last long because, according to rumors, the guy who took away the surgeon's eye was going to go there. Having put the eye prosthesis in place, the guy greeted Kong Pildu with a sly smile and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The silence that reigned in the room was broken by the loud fall of a baseball bat. The surgeon said that so much time had passed and asked the main character to at least try to smile, because it was impossible to stand with such an expression on his face. Kong Pildu asked to stop this chatter and asked where the CCTV footage was, because that was all he needed. The guy looked at his computer and was surprised that his friend was here just for this. After that, he said that he was surprised that it was so noisy outside the door, and suggested that the main character had not changed at all. The surgeon continued to say that the guy was the same as he was then, and could do anything to get what he wanted, which is why he was called a psychopath at school. Calling the guy a one-eyed idiot, Kong Pildu asked what he was talking about all the time, and couldn't believe that they knew each other. This greatly offended the surgeon, causing him to become angry and purse his lower lip. He couldn't believe that the main character didn't remember him, because it was he who deprived him of one eye, because he said that he was too noisy. Kong Pildu was calm, and continued to claim that he did not remember him at all. This made the surgeons even more angry, and demanded that he give him a clear answer to the question of whether the main character remembered him or not. Kong Pildu didn't answer and only stared at the nervous boy, feeling the imminent danger. Unable to cope with his emotions, the surgeon grabbed a scalpel and threatened to rip out the main character's eyeballs. The armed guy tried to attack his attacker, but Kang Pil-do managed to dodge in time. The surgeon tried to hit the protagonist several more times, but these attempts were unsuccessful. It seemed like Kang Pil-do could easily deal with this opponent, but each time it became more and more difficult for him to dodge. In order not to lose his balance, the main character took a few steps back, moving to a safe distance. It seemed that Kang Pil-do was not at all interested in this fight, since first he wanted to get the video recordings. The main character looked angrily at his opponent, who was blocking his path and because of whom the guy was only wasting his time here. Suddenly, a wound opened on Kang Pil-do's cheek and scarlet blood gushed out. This surprised the guy very much. The surgeon said that his scalpels were so sharp that the guy didn't immediately notice that he had cut him. After that, he asked him again if he remembered him. Taking off his jacket, Kang Pil-do replied that he was not interested in useless people, and therefore he deliberately did not remember him. Rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, the main character asked why the guy wanted him to recognize him so much. These words angered the surgeon again, causing him to bite his lower lip in anger. After this, the guy threatened to make it so that the main character would remember him for the rest of his life, after which he rushed into attack. Pil-do was able to easily dodge this blow and was already preparing to attack in response, but everything was not so simple. In a few seconds, the surgeon deftly twisted the scalpel in his hand in order to grasp it differently. The next moment, a sharp instrument plunged deep into the protagonist's shoulder. Trying to erase the pain, he clenched his teeth tightly. The surgeon laughed loudly and said that his opponent didn't even imagine how long he had been waiting for you. He invited that he would carefully cut the main character into pieces and carefully store them, after which he pressed even harder on the bleeding wound. Kang Pil-do tried to free himself and tried to firmly remove the scoundrel's hands, but he didn't have enough strength to do it. Then the guy decided to act differently and took a step back, pushed his back hard and raised his head up. The next moment he hit his opponent with his forehead with all his might. The surgeon's nose was broken, causing him to lose his balance and begin to fall backwards. Splashes of scarlet blood flew around, staining the already dirty floor of the makeshift operating room. Unexpectedly, Kang Pil-do said that he now remembered the guy and regretted that he had not gouged out both of his eyes. The surgeon said that the main character could say whatever he wanted, but he would soon regret what he did. The guy grabbed the scalpel again, still hoping to get even with his enemy. The surgeon attacked the protagonist again, who was able to dodge, but this time Kang Pil-do was not going to hold back. The young prosecutor attacked his opponent and hit his target with a precise blow. This was followed by another sweeping blow with a scalpel, which the main character also dodged. Pil-do chose the right moment and hit his opponent again, this time in the stomach. From this attack, the surgeon doubled over in pain and screamed loudly, which indicated that he had already lost this fight. Out of helplessness, the guy dropped the scalpel from his hands, which fell with a loud ringing sound onto the concrete floor. The surgeon held his stomach and tried to catch his breath, but Kang Pil-do did not want to give his opponent a chance to rest. The main character swung his fist again in order to end this fight with one blow and get down to really important things. You understand that he will no longer have the opportunity to dodge. The surgeon tried to cover himself with his hands, closing his eyes in fear. The guy was very surprised when he realized that the blow he was so afraid of never came. Looking ahead, he didn't see anyone in front of him. Kang Pil-do had disappeared somewhere. Turning back, the surgeon saw that the main character was confidently walking towards the computer in order to get what he came here for. Kang Pil-do began to actively type on the keyboard the information he still needed. Suddenly, he turned to his opponent and said that first he would check the records and then decide what to do with him. So he asked the surgeon to be a good boy and wait for him. The guy was angry and asked if the main character was going to ignore him until the very end. Kang Pil-do did not answer this question because he had found what he was looking for, and all his attention was concentrated on it. The guy immediately picked up the computer mouse and turned on the desired video. The video showed the main character's mother kneeling in front of the surgeon. The woman was literally begging the guy for something, but it was impossible to understand anything more specifically because there was no sound. Then Kang Pil-do asked the surgeon why his mother was kneeling in front of him and asking for something. There was no answer. There was a deathly silence in the room, which was emphasized by the dim light of a small wall lamp. Suddenly, the computer monitor went out, which greatly surprised the main character. The reason for this was that someone turned off the switches and thereby de-energized the entire room. Now, in addition to the oppressive silence, there was pitch darkness in the room. From the darkness came the surgeon's voice, asking if the protagonist wanted to know the answer to his question. The voice continued to ask if the boy wanted to know why his mother had come all this way and knelt before him. Suddenly, several green lights began to appear in the distance of the room. The surgeon made fun of his enemy because he was so interested in finding out everything. Kang Pil-do peered into the darkness, not even guessing what to expect. Suddenly, a sharp scalpel flew out of the darkness towards the main character. Kang Pil-do couldn't see it at all, so the tool hit the target right on target. The main character almost lost his balance from surprise. Drops of blood began to slowly drip at his feet, indicating that the guy was wounded. The scalpel was deeply embedded in the same shoulder that had been previously wounded, so Kang Pil-do had to endure the pain again. However, the protagonist fearlessly pulled the instrument out of the wound and threw it aside. The ringing sound of metal hitting the concrete floor echoed throughout the room. The surgeon's voice noted that the main character finally looked interested and thought that, of course, he had to find out everything. The surgeon confidently said that it had to do with his mother. The main character listened attentively to the guy because finally he could get answers to his questions. The surgeon began his story about what happened here not long ago. One day the main character's mother showed up here to talk about a deal. The woman said that she had heard that there was a product that could only be obtained here and promised to pay any amount if she could get something. After this, she handed the surgeon several sheets of paper and asked him to get her exactly what was written on them. For some time, the guy studied the documents intently, turning over one sheet of paper after another. Suddenly, the guy broke into a smile and said that you definitely can't buy something like that in a department store. The woman said that this is exactly why she came to him, after which she asked if the guy could do it. Without looking up from the documents, the surgeon said that he would do everything that was necessary, since the woman would pay him well. But the guy added, smiling slyly, that the payment did not necessarily have to be monetary because he wanted to receive something else. To this, the woman confidently replied that if the guy gets her what she wants, then in return she will give him anything he wants. Kang Pil-do held his wound and continued to listen attentively to the scoundrel, breathing heavily. The surgeon continued to say with admiration that the madam from the Manhwa group promised to give him anything he wanted, and so of course he had to do everything possible to fulfill her order. Kang Pil-do silently looked around, trying to determine the exact location of his opponent. The surgeon saw the main character perfectly well, because he had put on a night vision device in advance. Swinging his scalpels, he asked if the guy had guessed what his mother was so desperately looking for. Kang Pil-do assumed the worst and was about to voice his guess, but suddenly fell silent. The reason for this was the surgeon, who threw scalpels with all his might towards the main character. Unable to dodge, Kang Pil-do covered his head with his hands in order to somehow protect himself from the sharp surgical knives. The guy continued to say with admiration that the woman was desperately trying to find a person who looked like her. To put it simply, she was looking for a corpse. This meant that the protagonist's mother needed a corpse that would die in her place. Having heard everything that was needed, Kang Pil-do decided that there was no point in holding back any longer. The surgeon did not miss her chance and suggested that it was a shock for the main character to learn that his mother was walking around the area looking for a corpse. He continued to say, laughing loudly, that he had not seen his confidence and suggested that it was because he had lost too much blood. After this, the surgeon said that it was not too late and Kang Pil-do could still beg for mercy. The guy took another scalpel and asked why the main character couldn't do this because his mother was very good at it. Kang Pil-do didn't react to these sharp words at all because he was still shocked by the information he had just learned. The surgeon decided that now he would be like the main character, getting everything he wanted and doing everything possible to achieve this. So he changed the reward for completing the deal. The guy said that Kang Pil-do's eyes looked perfect just like that woman's. The surgeon, laughing madly, continued to say that he had set the woman a condition according to which he would find her the necessary body if in exchange she gave him her son's eye. Kang Pil-do looked with hatred in the direction where his opponent's voice came from. It seemed like the guy wanted to deal with him right now, but he couldn't do it yet. The surgeon continued to laugh, remembering the look on the woman's face when he voiced these conditions. The guy was very amused by how the noble ladies from the Manhwa group begged him on their knees all day to change the payment for the services. After this, the surgeon attacked the main character again. The exhausted guy could not dodge in any way and therefore took all the blows of the sharp knives. Blood gushed from the boy's body, pushing the scalpels out of his mutilated body. The surgeon rhetorically asked what the prosecutor's son was doing while his mother was in such a state. He also added that in the end, the woman did not agree to give up the main character's eye. The guy admired this act and said that it was true motherly love. Suddenly, the surgeon began to approach his victim, saying along the way that he was not going to give up and still wanted to get what was his. He continued to tell that during the same period of time, people came to him who offered a good deal. They promised that they would let the surgeon see the main character if he gave them his mother. Kung Pil-du endured these words and looked around, but saw only pitch darkness. The guy was still standing in place, covering himself with his hands and breathing heavily, trying to hold out as long as possible. At this time, the surgeon picked up an axe and suggested ending these emotional family conversations and continuing the conversation that had begun earlier. Kung Pil-du clenched his fists tightly, anticipating the next blow from his opponent. Suddenly, he relaxed and began to lower his hands. It seemed that the main character had resigned himself to his fate. The surgeon praised him for this decision and said that resistance would only make the boy's life more difficult. Smiling slyly, the surgeon promised to take good care of the main character, because he was supposed to meet his mother in hell, and therefore his face had to be valuable and safe. Kung Pil-du lowered his head, closed his eyes, and began to listen to the silence. The surgeon was very close to the main character and could see him perfectly thanks to the night vision device. Suddenly, Kung Pil-du opened his eyes and turned sharply towards his opponent, as if he could see him in this pitch darkness. The surgeon was very surprised by this and even hesitated for a moment, not knowing what to do next. The guy couldn't believe that the enemy saw him in the dark, but he thought that in any case it was already too late, after which he attacked Kung Pil-du. A large, sharp axe was descending on the main character at great speed. The next moment there was a roar, and it seemed that the surgeon had succeeded in doing what he had planned. For a while, silence reigned in the dark room again. Not even the breathing of the opponents could be heard. This didn't last long because something fell loudly and rolled across the floor. These were night vision goggles that belonged to a surgeon. They didn't sit idle for long. Kung Pil-du tried on his glasses. Now he could clearly see his opponent, who was badly injured. The surgeon, trying to come to terms with the pain, assumed that his opponent had been aiming for the night vision goggles from the very beginning. After that, the guy started getting angry and talking about how the main character wouldn't have had an advantage if they fought in the dark. The surgeon waved his arms and shouted that his opponent also didn't see anything, so he shouldn't have hidden like some kind of loser. Without waiting for any answer, the guy shouted loudly, ordering the main character to get out of the darkness. The surgeon continued to pace back and forth, assuming that Kung Pil-du was afraid of him and was therefore hiding. Suddenly, the main character calmly asked the guy if he had seen him. The surgeon was surprised to hear this question. He asked how he could see anything since it was pitch dark here, after which he ordered his opponent to stop talking nonsense and come out. In fact, the main character had already turned on the switches long ago, and the room was completely filled with lamplight. Kung Pil-du calmly informed his opponent about this, understanding what the matter really was. The protagonist stood right in front of the surgeon and said that the reason was that he simply could no longer see. The guy didn't understand what Kung Pil-du was talking about and was still convinced that the room was pitch dark. Examining the scalpel, the main character admitted that the blade was indeed very sharp, as the surgeon had said, because he had not even been able to notice that his eye had been cut. The guy couldn't believe it and immediately touched his face. His prosthesis was still in place. Touching his eye, the surgeon felt that it was seriously injured. The next moment, he realized everything, which is why he began to scream furiously, trying to deny reality. He fell to his knees in front of Kung Pil-du, not believing that he had lost his only eye and now could not see anything at all. The guy stretched out his hand forward, trying to find the main character by touch. The surgeon reassured himself by saying that everything was fine and suggested that he do everything as planned. He suggested that if he rips out the main character's eyes right now and implants them into himself, he will be able to see again. Kung Pil-du raised his hand as if he wanted to console his defeated enemy. The next moment, the main character hit the guy in the ear with all his might, throwing him away from himself. The surgeon began to scream frantically in pain, not understanding what had just happened to him. He lay on the floor and tried to come to his senses without trying to harm the main character anymore. Grabbing his ear, the surgeon loudly asked what that was and why it hurt so much. Suddenly, the main character snapped his fingers, attracting the attention of the defeated enemy to himself. Kung Pil-du said that they still needed to talk, and so asked the boy to listen to him carefully. The main character was sure that the surgeon could no longer hear with that ear because the eardrum was damaged. The surgeon couldn't believe it and asked the guy not to remain silent so that he could check it himself. Unexpectedly, Kung Pil-du grabbed the guy by the hair so that he would not say anything unnecessary and listened to him carefully. The main character asked who were those people who came and asked about his mother and demanded that he answer correctly if the guy did not want to go completely deaf. Some time passed. The advertising sign on the building was still not lit. Several expensive cars drove up to the building, from which serious people in black suits emerged. Accompanying their boss, they silently headed to the entrance. Several men remained to guard the cars. Here, several more people in black suits were already waiting for them. They were led into the room to be shown the reason why they were there. The bloody guy sat on the floor, showing no signs of life. The leader of the bandits asked if he was still alive. One of the subordinates confirmed this and added that the guy was muttering something, but the man could not understand what he was saying. The surgeon continued to make some sounds while the leader looked at him with regret. Kang Tae-gu took out his sharp knife from his pocket and said that this is exactly why the guy needed good friends. After that, the third son cut the boy's throat with one swing. Bloody splashes gushed out, staining the walls. The surgeon's lifeless body fell to the floor, and the pool of blood beneath him began to gradually grow. One of the men turned to his boss and said that Kang Pil-du could not have gone far, so he should order his subordinates to quickly go and look for him. Kang Tae-gu replied that everything was fine, and therefore there was no need to do that, after which he began to carefully examine the room. The guy saw a surveillance camera in the corner and assumed that his brother must have seen the recordings and already knew who else was there besides their mother. And so it turned out. Immediately after the main character dealt with his enemy, he began to look for the necessary information on the computer. He looked through one entry after another until he found what he needed. Now Kang Pil-du knew who else was involved in his mother's death and who would be his next target. Kang Pil-du was confident that sooner or later his brother would find his way to him, and so he just had to wait. Several expensive cars drove up to the headquarters of the Manhwa group. Kang Tae-gu got out of the car and headed towards the entrance. The loyal subordinates greeted their boss. The guy approached the entrance and didn't like that the guards were gloomy, and every time he saw them it seemed to him that he was entering a funeral. Suddenly one of the guards put out his hand to block the third son's path. After that he apologized and said that Kang Tae-gu could not go further. The guy did not understand what was happening and demanded to let him through because he had little time. The guard explained that they had received orders that only designated people could attend today's meeting. The guy was unhappy with this and reminded that his name was Kang Tae-gu, and he was the third son of the Manhwa group, implying that he was not the last person here. The man replied that he knew this well, but the guy still could not attend the meeting today. Kang Tae-gu was very angry, and taking out his knife asked if the guards had forgotten what kind of character he had. The men immediately tensed up and became nervous, anticipating the inevitable conflict. Kang Tae-gu loudly asked who had forbidden him to go to the headquarters and asked to call that person to him. At that time, another man in a black suit approached the entrance. Someone's voice confidently said that it was he who forbade the third son to attend the meeting. Kang Tae-gu recognized him and turned around with displeasure. It was Kang Mu. He looked at his younger brother and guessed that he still hadn't gotten rid of his old habits, so he couldn't have a positive attitude towards him. After that, the guy said that Kang Tae-gu should be ashamed, and added that if he wanted to dance with his knife so much, he could have done it somewhere else. Kang Tae-gu was very angry and asked who he thought he was because he was undoubtedly the president on the list of board members. Kang Mu rudely replied that not all presidents were the same and asked his bro not to forget that he was only the president of a subcontractor. After this, the second son headed towards the entrance to the headquarters, calmly passing the guards and leaving his brother behind. Finally, he added that because Kang Tae-gu could go wild just because of a title, there was chaos in the company. Next, Kang Mu ordered the guards to do their job properly, because if they couldn't control a rude guy like his brother, the company's image would go to hell. Kang Tae-gu was very angry at his older brother and thought that he was just lucky to get a higher position because he was born a minute earlier. Hearing these words, Kang Mu immediately stopped. He was very offended by the fact that Kang Tae-gu belittled his merits. The guy looked angrily at his brother and assumed that he was completely fearless to dare to say such a thing. After this, Kang Mu began to roll up his sleeves in anticipation of the inevitable fight. Approaching his brother, he said that a lot of time had passed since he was beaten and suggested that they find out right now who was on top. Kang Tae-gu was glad to finally hear these words from his brother and suggested that he stop chatting and sort out their hierarchy properly. Kang Mu said that he should have beaten his brother up so that he would stop talking nonsense and threatened that it would not end with just a few broken bones like last time. The next moment, the two brothers suddenly moved towards each other. Kang Mu swung his fist to punish his impudent younger brother with one blow. Kang Tae-gu decided not to hold back, and so he grabbed his knife again without thinking about the well-being of his opponent. Suddenly, someone nearby stamped their foot loudly and ordered the brothers to stop fighting. It was the first son of the Manhwa group, Kang Cha-woo. He looked menacingly at his younger brothers, who immediately froze. They did not dare to continue the fight in front of their elder brother and only silently looked at him, waiting for his next order. Kang Cha-woo, not paying any more attention to them, walked past and headed towards the entrance to the headquarters because he was in a hurry to get to the meeting. No one dared to say a word. For a while, there was absolute silence and an oppressive atmosphere on the street. Finally, Kang Mu decided to follow his elder brother's example and also headed to the meeting, leaving his opponent behind. Unexpectedly, Kang Chaowu turned to Kang Taegu to give advice to his foolish younger brother. The guy said that if he wanted to stay in the group, he should have increased his ambitions and just done what he and Kang Mu told him. The first son also added that Kang Taegu should not have tried to brazenly take over his brother's position. Kang Chaowu asked if his brother understood everything. To this, Kang Taegu only clenched his fists tightly, trying to cope with his anger. Having received no answer, the first son assumed that his younger brother had swallowed his tongue. Kang Taegu resigned himself to his situation and decided to submit. The boy bowed respectfully to his departing older brothers and replied that he understood everything. Despite his words, Kang Taegu had no intention of forgetting his ambitions. He was very angry at his older brother for essentially ordering him to do his dirty work for the rest of his life. The guy looked at the headquarters of the company that he was not allowed into and thought that he would not just sit in the shadows until the end of his days. The third son decided that he would show everyone who was the right person to become the next owner of Xianghua. Kang Taegu smiled slyly, because he had already come up with a plan according to which he could realize his desire. At the entrance to the night establishment, there were several expensive cars, and people in formal black suits were on duty. There were so many documents on the table about the financial statements of the affiliates of Manhwa Group. The subordinate reported that the illegal businesses of the company were described here. While looking through the documents, Kang Taegu praised his subordinate for his good work. He was very surprised by the information that was described in the documents and admitted that his brothers had done a good job. After that, the guy asked if the subordinate was sure of this. The man replied that he was completely sure that this information was obtained by Chinese hackers who were known for their professionalism in this area. The man was worried whether everything would be okay with his boss because he could be in danger if everything came to light. Kang Taegu put the documents aside. Looking sternly at the man, he assumed that he didn't believe in him either. The subordinate immediately began to deny this and asked who he should follow, if not the third son. Kang Taegu liked this answer. He agreed that all of his subordinates had to enter the company's main office with him. After this, Kang Taegu slowly stood up from the table and headed towards the exit. Finally, the guy ordered his subordinate to carefully hand over these documents to Kang Pildu. Opening the door for his boss, the man replied that he would carry out this order. Walking down the long corridor, the man asked why the documents had to be handed over to Kang Pildu. He added that the prosecutor had already gotten wind of the president's connections, and there was no guarantee that the youngest son would decide to investigate his family's case. The man then suggested that they should check someone else, but Kang Taegu stopped him and said that he could not trust other prosecutors. The guy explained that with the identity of his younger brother, he would definitely start an investigation because he didn't care about the family. Entering the spacious room, Kang Taegu said that they were just handing Pildu a knife and suggested that his younger brother would definitely dance a beautiful dance with this knife for them. Several dozen men in black suits, upon seeing their boss, immediately greeted him with a respectful bow. Kang Taegu smiled slyly and was already anticipating that after all the conditions were met, they would take over the company Manhwa Group. Several months have passed since the above-mentioned events. In one of the rooms of the hotel, which was located in a quiet area of the metropolis, the light was on. Kang Pildu sat on the bed with his head down. His entire body was covered in deep wounds from the recent fight. The wounds still hurt and reminded the main character of that night. He remembered the words of the surgeon, who enthusiastically told him that some people had promised to let him see him if he gave them his mother. Kang Pildu held his phone in his hand and thought about something meticulously, going over the recent events in his head. Finally, the main character made up his mind and began to enter a phone number that was familiar to him. Walking up to the window, Kang Pildu patiently listened to the beeps and thought about how far this would go. At this time, Kang Mu, accompanied by his loyal subordinates, was leaving the company headquarters. The subordinates bowed to their boss, but he, heading to his car, was dissatisfied with something. One of the subordinates leaned against the car and dozed peacefully while someone was getting closer and closer to him. Someone loudly called out to his subordinate, causing him to immediately wake up, not understanding who might need him now. The next moment, Kang Mu hit the man with all his might, causing him to lose his balance. The second son loudly asked how his subordinate could sleep at work after constantly receiving his salary. People passing by looked at what was happening in horror. Kang Mu, without pity for the guilty subordinate, beat him with his feet. Another subordinate immediately ran up to the guy. He tried to stop Kang Mu and asked him to calm down because there were a lot of people around. Suddenly, the second son hit the second subordinate in the face with all his might. After that, he addressed him by name, calling him Choi. Chong Sun ordered him to watch how he addressed him since they were no longer in high school. Kang Mu added that it was precisely because the guy worked so carelessly that his subordinates were in such a state. Choi Chong-sun bowed respectfully and, admitting his mistakes, asked for forgiveness from Mr. Kang Mu. The second son threatened that if his subordinate failed again, he would lose Choi's head. Chong-sun promised that he would work harder. After that, Kang Mu decided to go about his business, but suddenly someone called him. The guy took his phone out of his pocket but saw that the number was unknown. Nevertheless, he answered the call in order to find out who was calling and what he wanted. But there was silence on the other end. Kang Pil-do silently looked out the window. Then Kang Mu ordered the stranger to speak, since he had already called and asked who it was. The main character remembered how, after he dealt with his opponent, he began to search for the necessary information on the computer. He looked through one entry after another until he found what he needed. Now Kang Pil-do knew who else was involved in his mother's death and who would be his next target. In the recording, the main character expected to see anyone but his second older brother. He couldn't believe that even Kang Mu had something to do with this matter. There was still silence on the other end of the line. Kang Mu assumed that it was his younger brother calling him now. Finally, Kang Pil-do greeted Kang Mu coldly and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Kang Pil-do greeted his elder brother coldly and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Kang Mu asked if the protagonist thought that he was the one who killed their mother. After that, the guy asked what Kang Pil-do would do if it turned out that this was really the case. The second son continued to say that his younger brother might try to come to him and kill him. He was even curious about whether Kang Pil-do would be able to stand up to the entire Shenghua group. Kang Mu was angry, and once again told the protagonist to come to him since he was so arrogant. Some time passed, dull blows echoed throughout the room. The iron chain rang loudly with each blow, with small intervals. Someone diligently trained their fighting skills, not sparing the punching bag. The man was on edge and took out his emotions on the sports equipment. Kang Mu delivered another crushing blow as if he were a professional athlete. From such a powerful attack, the iron chain on which the punching bag was cheerfully attached could not withstand and broke. The next moment, the punching bag flew back with a crash and fell to the floor. Suddenly, blood began to leak out of it, staining the floor of the gym. Kang Mu looked at the bloody body that was in the punching bag and ordered his subordinates to get rid of it. At this point, the guy's training was over. Kang Mu asked how Choi's case was going. Chong Sun replied that they were still working on it. Buttoning his shirt, the second son said that he had let his younger brothers go in peace, but they had started to talk too much. The guy always knew that Kang Taegu was a bastard, but he didn't think that Kang Pil-do would be involved in this. Kang Mu ordered to work harder because there shouldn't be any problems during the election of his father. Choi Chung-sun obediently handed his master his jacket and assured him that everything would be done well. Also, Kang Mu was ordered to keep a close eye on Kang Taegu, because now he was acting suspiciously quiet. Choi Chung-sun didn't expect to hear this and asked what he should do if the third son noticed surveillance. Kang Mu directly replied that in that case, the younger brother's head should be on the floor that very second. The guy was indignant and asked, since when did he need to explain everything to Choi? Chong-sun apologized to the director and replied that they would do their best. Kang Mu said sarcastically that his subordinate only knew how to do that he could apply force. After that, he looked at the floor. Suddenly, the second son waved his hand, beckoning Choi over. Chong-sun to his place. The guy immediately asked the director what happened. Kang Mu grabbed the boy by the head and tilted him down, pointing at something on the shoe. The second son asked his subordinate if his shoes could be so dirty. After that, he remembered how Choi Chong-sun used to lick her often and assumed that it was time for the guy to remember the past. The other subordinates couldn't help themselves and started making fun of Choi Chong-sun. The guy looked at them with contempt, realizing that he had no other choice. On one of the shelves were many awards from participation in competitions, and between them was a framed photograph. It featured Kang Mu and Choi Chong-sun, and it seemed like they were great friends. But that was before, and now the guy sank to the floor in order to fulfill the order of his master. Closing his eyes and experiencing Choi's incredible humiliation, Chong-sun began to clean Kang Mu's shoes with his tongue. The second son watched this spectacle with pleasure, and praising his subordinate, asked him to work even better in the future. Night fell. A lonely car drove through the private sector with rich houses. She stopped at one of the houses. The driver turned off the headlights and began to watch. Choi went outside. Chong-sun turned to the man who was standing near the house. Lazily pulling himself up, he asked his subordinate if it was time to change. The man bowed respectfully and then went into the house. The man in the car continued to watch all this. It was Kang Pil-do. He thought with annoyance that of course he expected this, but he had been under surveillance all day. The main character was puzzled that he would have to meet Choi Chong-sun. Now he was to be addressed as Chief Choi Chong-sun. He stood humbly at the house and was absolutely calm despite the possible danger. The main character thought that in order to meet his older brother, he would have to first deal with this guy. Kang Pil-do knew that it would not be easy, but he had no other choice. The guy looked at the estate again. The light was on the second floor, which meant that the owner was at home. After some time, Kang Pil-do decided to get out of the car, taking a hammer with him. The guards immediately contacted their boss on the radio and asked if everything was okay. Kang Pil-do gradually approached the house, anticipating what would happen next. Choi Chong-sun replied to his subordinates that everything was fine and they could go because this was where it would end. After that, the guy put away the radio so that it would not bother him anymore. For a while there was silence on the street. The opponents looked at each other calmly without saying a word. Finally, Kang Pil-do said that many people must have come here for answers, because Choi's face Chong-sun wasn't surprised at all. The guy replied that he was actually upset because recently the main character became the first one to come here alone. I get to my feet. Choi Chong-sun said that he didn't know what Kang Pil-do wanted from the director. Nevertheless, the guy advised the main character to silently turn around and leave here. Warming up, Choi Chong-sun said that he was supposed to get his salary tomorrow, and he didn't want to spoil his mood before such a good day. Kang Pil-do had no intention of doing this. He tightly gripped the hammer in his hand and prepared to attack. The next moment, the main character, swinging his weapon, rushed at his opponent, who was already ready for this. Choi Chong-sun said with displeasure that he was irritated by working from paycheck to paycheck. Kang Pil-do tried to hit the guy with a hammer, but he managed to easily dodge the attack. The main character was surprised because before this, his opponents were not so agile. Choi chose a good moment. Chong-sun swung his fist to attack the boy back. The next moment, a powerful blow struck the main character and instantly subdued him. Kang Pil-do managed to stay on his feet, but now he needed time to recover. Choi Chong-sun said that he expected this, but didn't think that the main character would actually come here. Looking angrily at his opponent, Kang Pil-do noticed that the guy was still the same. The protagonist was referring to his opponent's fighting skills and mixed martial arts champion status. Choi Chong-sun began to deny this, saying that he had changed since a lot of time had passed since then. However, the guy did not believe that the main character seriously came here to fight with his older brother. Choi Chong-sun admitted that it was none of his business, but he didn't understand why the brothers had to fight and suggested simply asking for forgiveness. Kang Pil-do didn't like this advice and angrily asked the boy to mind his own business. Choi Chong-sun didn't understand why he had to be so rude and said that he simply sided with the main character because he wasn't a stranger to him. Kang Pil-do did not want to continue this conversation, which he told his opponent, and demanded that he let him through, otherwise he would regret it. The next moment, the main character quickly pushed off the ground in order to attack his opponent again. Kang Pil-do quickly approached Choi Chong-sun and was determined to deal with the obstacle that stood in his way. Choi Chong-sun was not happy about this and said that the main character was as rude as his older brother, and it irritated him. Meanwhile, a heavy hammer was already flying towards the guy at great speed, aiming straight at his head. Despite the danger, Choi Chong-sun was able to react in time and knocked the hammer out of the protagonist's hand with one precise blow. Kang Pil-do's hand was shaking violently from the pain that the guy was trying his best to cope with. In addition, the main characters did not expect that he would be left unarmed against a strong opponent. A moment later, he saw that Choi Chong-sun was already planning to attack him in return. Luckily, Kang Pil-do managed to dodge and avoid the former professional fighter's strike. The protagonist realized that this was his chance, and so quickly took a suitable stance for the attack. Kang Pil-do swung his fist, intending to at least provide himself with the opportunity for further attacks, since he understood that he could not win with one blow. Choi Chong-sun took the blow, but it couldn't seriously hurt him. After that, he quickly attacked the protagonist in response. At this moment, time seemed to slow down for Kang Pil-do. He clearly saw his opponent's approaching fist, but he couldn't do anything about it. The next moment, a powerful attack hit the guy, causing him to lean back. Kang Pil-do lost his balance and blood flowed from his nose and mouth. The main character fell to the ground with a crash. He was still conscious, but in shock from what had happened. Choi approached Kang Pil-do Chong-sun to check his condition. The guy was surprised that the main character thought that he was capable of dealing with his older brother or even the entire Manhwa group. Choi Chong-sun leaned over to his fallen opponent and said that he had had enough of lying around and that he should go after him. There was a glass of strong alcohol on a small table. Intense rhythmic sounds could be heard from the bed. After some time, they became quiet and absolute silence reigned in the room. With a sense of accomplishment, Kang Mu sat down on the bed to rest. Suddenly, he heard some strange sounds in the street. It seemed as if someone was fighting right next to the house. Kang Mu immediately looked towards the window and began to listen carefully in order to confirm his guess. The second son got angry because he couldn't believe that this puppy actually came to him. Choi's powerful attack, Chong Sun caught up with Kang Pil-du and blood spurted from his nose and mouth. The main character fell to the ground with a crash, unable to continue the fight. The guy was still conscious but in shock from what had happened. The pools of blood gradually increased. Choi Chong-sun was surprised that the main character thought that he was able to deal with his brother and said that he had enough of lying around and should follow him. The guy insisted that he didn't hate Kang Pil-du and it was just a matter of survival. Without waiting for any reaction from Choi Chong-sun, grabbed Kang Pil-du by the collar. After this, he dragged the defeated enemy into the house of his master. Suddenly, Choi Chong-sun stopped because he heard some sounds behind him. The guy turned around to see what was happening. He saw Kang Pil-du getting to his feet and assumed that he still had some strength left. Kang Pil-du didn't respond to this and only tried to come to his senses, breathing heavily. Choi swinging his fist, Chong-sun said that the main character was just as stubborn as his older brother and became resentful that he had to do all this. Suddenly, Kang Pil-du pushed off the ground with a sharp push, making his forward thrust even stronger. The main character attacked Choi Chong-sun, let him know that the fight was not over yet. Clutching his opponent tightly, the guy dragged him along the street at great speed. In the end, the protagonist hit Choi, hard Chong-sun, against a stone wall. The guy intended to free himself from this grip and therefore swung his hand. In the next moment, Choi Chong-sun hit the protagonist back with all his might with his elbow. Kang Pil-du screamed furiously in pain, unable to bear it. As soon as the protagonist stepped back, Choi Chong-sun decided to take revenge on him for the dirty trick. But Kang Pil-du did not allow his opponent to do this and again attacked him, hitting him against the wall. These blows did not go unnoticed by Choi Chong-sun lost his dominant role in the fight. Kang Pil-du continued to hold his opponent tightly, not giving him any chance to counterattack. Choi Chong-sun realized that Kang Pil-du thought that it would be enough to just close the distance in order to defeat him. It seemed that this would really work, because the main character was already swinging his fist in order to deliver another blow. But for an experienced fighter, it was too obvious, and that is why Choi Chong-sun easily defended himself from this attack. Suddenly, Choi Chong-sun realized that something was wrong, and that made him hesitate. It turned out that Kang Pil-du had deliberately attacked in such a way that his opponent could defend himself and was already preparing his next strike. The next moment, a loud impact sound was heard throughout the area. It was still unclear what exactly had happened. At this time, the door to the room opened and a dark silhouette appeared in the corridor. Kang Mu walked out of his room and headed towards the stairs. Only the light from the street lamps illuminated the dark corridor. The guy heard loud sounds on the street and looked out the window to check if everything was okay. The second son frowned at what he saw and became tense, unable to contain his anger. Kang Pil-du pounced on Choi Chong-sun, grabbed him by the throat and began to strangle his opponent. Choi Chong-sun tried to free himself, while thinking that he had completely forgotten that the guy was Kang Mu's younger brother. Kang Pil-du looked at the boy with hatred and his eyes burned with rage. This whole situation really irritated Choi Chong-sun, and this seemed to give him more strength. The experienced fighter attacked his opponent with his foot in order to throw him off. Choi Chong-sun was able to free himself after throwing Kang Pil-du over himself. The throw was so strong that the main characters flew far back. Still, he managed to quickly get to his feet and, pushing off the ground, rush back into the fight. Choi Chong-sun said that the protagonist's older brother only ordered him to be brought and not to engage in battle. Kang Pil-du approached his opponent at great speed, not listening to him at all. Choi Chong-sun was angry and said that he had no orders to leave the boy unharmed. Kang Pil-du tried to attack his opponent, but he managed to deftly dodge. Choi Chong-sun dropped to the ground abruptly to demonstrate one of the techniques he was familiar with. Kang Pil-du immediately understood what his opponent was planning to do, but he didn't have time to do anything. In a matter of seconds, Choi Chong-sun grabbed the protagonist's leg tightly. After this, the experienced fighter throws his leg over the opponent's leg. With one deft move, he managed to knock Kang Pil-du off his feet and throw him to the ground. Choi Chong-sun continued to hold the protagonist's leg tightly. Now he had the advantage in this fight. The guy, smiling slyly, asked if the main character thought that he would be able to win as soon as he shortened the distance. Kang Pil-du clearly understood that he was not in the best position right now. The next moment, Choi Chong-sun began to twist the protagonist's leg, causing him incredible pain. Kang Pil-du bit his lower lip, trying his best to endure the pain. In order to finally win this fight, Choi Chong-sun applies even more force to his pain hold. The main character couldn't stand it and screamed loudly. Choi Chong-sun looked at the suffering of his opponent and mentally asked him to give up, Otherwise, he would actually die. But the main character had no such thoughts. He reached for his opponent's leg. Choi Chung-sun didn't understand what the guy wanted to do, and therefore didn't loosen his grip for a moment and held him tightly. The next moment, the protagonist managed to free himself from the grip and grabbed Choi's leg instead. Chung-sun. Kang Pil-do pressed his leg tightly to himself and clasped his hands together so that his opponent had no chance to escape. Choi Chung-sun was very surprised and realized that the guy had not thought of giving up from the very beginning. Kang Pil-do smiled madly as he looked at his opponent, anticipating sweet revenge. Choi Chung-sun was very angry and demanded that the guy stop immediately before she regretted her actions. The next moment, a wild scream echoed throughout the area. Immediately after that, the street became completely silent. Kang Pil-do stood up and, dragging his feet, walked towards the entrance of the estate because he had not yet done what he had come here for. The protagonist left Choi behind him, Chung-sun, who could no longer stop him because his leg was broken. Choi Chung-sun suggested that perhaps this was where it would all end for him, but not for the protagonist. After that, he shouted out that he would never acknowledge him. Without holding back his emotions, the guy continued to say that he didn't know his older brother at all. Kang Pil-do turned around to listen carefully to what his defeated opponent had to say, because it could help him in the future. Choi Chung-sun was indignant because everyone thought that he was covering Kang Moo's back for money, but that was said by people who didn't know anything. They also said this because the guy could never beat Choi's second son. Chung-sun himself admitted that he would never be able to defeat him. The guy said that his boss always considered fights boring because he didn't just want to win. Kang Moo wanted his opponents to kneel before him in humiliation. The guy continued to say that in the end everyone had to obey him even if they resisted, and even if they ended up dying. That was Kang Moo. After that, Choi Chung-sun added that the second son would never get involved in a fight in which he could lose, so Kang Pil-do should have thought twice. The guy warned the main character that if he crosses this threshold now, he really could die. So it was better for him to go as far away as possible and bury himself in the deepest hole. That's exactly what Choi did. Chung-sun, who believed that this was the only way to survive. Kang Pil-do responded that he would also like to do this, but now there was nowhere to hide. After this, the main character looked at the doorbell that separated him from his cherished goal. The guy timidly extended his finger forward, once again thinking over the words of his defeated opponent. Finally, Kang Pil-do decided to press the bell, thus informing his older brother that he had arrived. A loud bell rang out on the first floor of the estate, informing the owner of the house of the arrival of a guest. Kang Moo slowly went to open the door, stepping barefoot on the cold floor. At the same time, the second son warmed up his body in anticipation of the inevitable fight with his younger brother. Kang Moo was getting closer and closer to the front door. There was a deathly silence in the dimly lit room. Finally, he turned the door handle to let in the guest he had been waiting for so long. The next moment, Kang Moo saw his younger brother after a long time of separation. This meeting was not at all joyful. Kang Pil-do looked sternly at his elder brother, piercing him with a furious gaze from his red eyes. Kang Moo opened the front door and looked at the uninvited guest with displeasure. This meeting was not at all joyful. Kang Pil-do meekly waited for the door to open, piercing the owner of the house with a furious look from his red eyes. As soon as the door opened, Kang Pil-do decided to rush into battle, and to do so, he pushed off the ground with his foot. The main character swung his hand in order to do what he came here for. But instead of the second son, there was some girl standing on the threshold of the house who opened the door thinking that Kang Moo had returned home. Kang Pil-do was very surprised and therefore stopped his attack so as not to harm an innocent person. Choi was watching all this from the side. Chung-sun. The guy laughed loudly and said that it was so unexpected that he was speechless. He added that normal people would first greet their daughters-in-law and not immediately start shaking their fists. Kang Pil-do approached the boy and said that he didn't have time for jokes, after which he asked where his older brother was. Choi Chung-sun asked the main character to put himself in his place, because if he answered this question, Kang Moo would immediately kill him. Kang Pil-do didn't even think about caring about his opponent's well-being, but instead stepped on the boy's broken leg. The next moment, Choi Chung-sun screamed loudly, unable to bear the terrible pain. But despite the shouts, Kang Pil-do decided to press harder so that his words would be even more convincing. Choi Chung-sun continued to scream in pain, but it was clear that he had already become more accommodating. Kang Pil-do was angry and ordered the boy to answer his questions until he became disabled. Choi Chung-sun asked to let go of his leg and asked if the main character had forgotten who Kang Moo was. The guy continued to say that he was the director of the branch of Manhwa group, and then asked if the main character would be able to defeat him. Choi Chung-sun asked to listen to him more carefully because this would be his last advice, The guy said that Kang Pil-do should immediately abandon his idea. Kang Pil-do accepted these words but also decided to give Choi advice. Chong-sun. The guy was scared because he thought that his leg would be hurt again by the main character's boot. Kang Pil-do threatened that if the guy did not answer his question right away, he would die not at the hands of his older brother, but at his. So he asked for the last time where Kang-moo was. At this time, in a completely different estate, Kang-moo was talking to someone and said that at night he had a habit of resting. Several men were kneeling, surrounded by loyal subordinates of the second son. Kang-moo asked how they knew that he was here, since this information was not disclosed anywhere. One of the men said that he did not understand what the guy was talking about and explained that he was just waiting for a friend in the car. To this, Kang-moo replied that if the man was going to lie, he could at least do it convincingly. At the same time, the guy was looking through photographs on the camera that was found on these uninvited guests. One of the men timidly said that he did not lie and hoped that Kang-moo would believe him. The next moment, the second son hit the liar on the head with all his might, causing him to fall to the ground. Kang-moo said that he didn't care how deep the man had already managed to dig into his past. He then asked the wounded man if he was really the friend he was waiting for in the car. Having received no answer, Kang-moo waved his hand and loudly ordered that his questions be answered. After this, the guy hit the man on the head with all his might again, without waiting for an answer from him. Immediately after that, Kang-moo dealt a few more blows. The bloody stream slowly flowed into the rainwater drain. Suddenly, a subordinate approached the director and said that he needed to look at something. He handed his boss a pass in the name of the head of the business division department of the Manhwa group. This pass belongs to one of the detained men. Seeing this, Kang-moo was very surprised because he knew that this unit was directly subordinate to the first son. The boy couldn't believe it and assumed that his brother still didn't trust him. Kang-moo did not understand how this was possible because he always obediently carried out all of his older brother's orders. The subordinate asked the director what they should do and suggested that they should somehow hush up this misunderstanding. Kang-moo decided that he would not sit idly by any longer if his brother decided to spy on him. After that, the guy ordered the men to be released. The subordinate was very surprised by this order because these men were watching the second son and they were let go so easily. As punishment for his insolence, Kang-moo threw a camera at his subordinate so that he would no longer dare to question his orders. The bloody camera fell onto the asphalt and broke, thus destroying all surveillance materials. The uninvited guests began to leave hastily under the silent gaze of the second son's subordinates. The man who held the pass took one last look at Kang-moo. In order to distract himself and think things through, the guy decided to have a smoke. Fortunately, his subordinates always had cigarettes and lighters. Kang-moo asked where Choi was now. Chong-sun. The guard assumed that he was now in front of the master's house. The second son ordered his subordinate to call him. The man immediately obeyed the order and began to take out his phone. I dialed the right number and the man asked what he needed to tell Choi, Chong-sun. Kang-moo said that they were expecting a meeting with their older brother, so Choi Chong-sun should find him a new punching toy to relieve his stress. At this time, Kang Pil-do was still near his elder brother's estate and talking with Choi Chong-sun. Choi Chong-sun said that he didn't know what happened with Kang-moo because they rarely saw each other lately. The guy added that, on top of everything else, his boss had added security and was only hiring those who had been in the business for a while. Therefore, he believed that the main character's idea of going to his second son alone was a real suicide. Kang Pil-do calmly replied that he didn't care because he would achieve his goal anyway. Choi Chong-sun didn't like this answer because the main character didn't think at all about what would happen to him if he screwed up. But then Kang-moo would figure everything out. For a while, the guy thought about how to help the main character and stay safe himself. After that, he put out his cigarette, which indicated that he had an answer to this question. Choi Chong-sun said that there was one place where Kang-moo always went alone, but the problem was that no one knew when he would decide to go there again. So the guy promised to tell the main character when that happened and asked him to just wait. Kang Pil-do was not satisfied with this. He said that if he had just wanted to wait, he would not have come here. Choi Chong-sun asked where he was in such a hurry because he had plenty of time. Suddenly, someone called him. The guy answered the phone. One of his subordinates was calling him to inform him of a new order from the boss. Choi Chong-sun was very surprised that this work had to be done right now and said that he could not do it. Suddenly, he looked at the main character and changed his mind. The guy asked to tell the boss that he had already found a suitable pair for him. It was deep night. However, it seemed that work was still in full swing in the industrial area of the metropolis. The main character's car slowly drove up to the entrance and stopped. For a while, the guy sat in the car and looked around. Finally, Kang Pil-do got out of the car, looking forward to the long-awaited meeting and headed towards the entrance. Along the way, he remembered Choi's words. Chong Sun said that there were 145 factories in the country that were managed by the Manhwa group. On one of them, Kang Mu's subordinates were already waiting for the guy. The main character had to head towards them. Choi Chong-sun continued to say that the factory was so big that no one from the outside would ever know what was going on inside. Kang Mu was well aware of this, so he was not afraid to do his business here. At the entrance, only the driver and secretary were waiting for the guy, and Kang Pil-du was able to deal with them with ease. The main character easily walked inside and began to follow the dark corridors, trying to find what he needed. Choi Chong-sun, tell him that the guy will need to find a third warehouse. He suggested that the main character would be interested in finding out what his older brother was doing there. Choi Chong-sun called this activity just a hobby of his boss. Kang Pil-du stopped at the large iron door, realizing what was waiting for him behind it. Finally, he took the plunge and began to open the door, anticipating a meeting with his enemy. The dim light from the corridor instantly filled the large room. The main character began to look around. Along the way, he remembered how surprised he was when he found out that his older brother had a hobby called Choi. Chong-sun said that only Kang Mu could give such pleasure. In an empty factory and ignoring all the rules, the second son played exclusively for himself, and the results of this game were many studied bodies. There was a piercing silence in the room, which only added to the tense atmosphere. After a long time, Kang Pil-du saw his older brother, who was standing with his back to him and did not even suspect who he would be playing with today. Kang Mu turned to his guest and assumed that he didn't need to explain anything because he had already learned everything from Choi Chong-sun. The guy only said that if the guest wins his game, he can take with him as much money as he wants. To this, the main character replied that he didn't need the money. Kang Mu was very surprised by this answer. The guy was even taken aback for a moment from surprise, because he was clearly hearing this for the first time. The second son still did not know that his younger brother was standing behind him, and so he asked what he wanted to get in case of victory. The main character stated that he only wanted to know the answers to his questions, one of which was who killed his mother. At that very second, Kang Mu realized that his younger brother was standing behind him, which meant that Choi Chong-sun betrayed him. The second son turned his head back slightly and addressed the main character. He said that in this world there really was no one that could be trusted. Kang Pil-du stated that he came here only to find out the answers to his questions, one of which was who killed his mother. At that very second, Kang Mu realized that the main character was standing behind him, which meant that Choi Chong-sun betrayed him. The second son turned his head back slightly and addressed his younger brother, whom he had not seen for so long. He said that in this world there really was no one that could be trusted. There was a piercing silence in the room, which only added to the tense atmosphere. Kang Pil-du agreed with his elder brother's statement and said that this was why he never trusted anyone. Looking at the enemy with a furious gaze, the guy added that he especially did not trust his family members. Kang Mu assumed that, judging by his brother's words, they had a difficult relationship with him, which is why they threw him out. The main character asked the guy not to be mistaken, because he himself abandoned his family. Kang Mu confirmed this and said that he was very surprised when he heard that his younger brother was leaving home. After this, the second son took a large wad of money from the table and said that the main character's actions were quite obvious. The next moment, with a sharp jerk, the guy threw the money up. The bills scattered around the room like confetti. The rustling of paper bills echoed throughout the room. The money slowly fell down. Kang Pil-du didn't pay any attention to this and kept looking at his older brother without taking his eyes off him. Suddenly, Kang Mu took advantage of the moment of surprise and attacked the main character. This powerful blow shook the air, causing large denomination bills to fly to the sides. Kang Pil-du managed to jump back in time, thereby dodging his older brother's attack. Kang Mu was surprised and said that the main character was not like the others. The guy assumed that if there was another person here, he would have already plunged headlong into dirty thoughts about money and would have struck first. The guy continued to say that Kang Pil-du didn't care about these papers and that this was what made him different from the usual rabble. The second son explained that this is precisely why such a creature as the main character was not needed by the family or even the Songhua group. After that, the guy quickly approached Kang Pil-du in order to attack him again. The main character managed to defend himself from the blow by putting his hands out, but for a while he lost concentration. His opponent decided to take advantage of this and was already preparing to attack the main character again, swinging his leg for this purpose. I understand that he won't be able to dodge Kang Pil-du, so he took a more confident stance to defend. However, the kick was too strong, and therefore the main character could not remain unharmed. A loud sound of impact echoed throughout the room. Kang Pil-du was unable to keep up with his elder brother's speed. Without slowing down, Kang Mu deftly transferred his body weight to his other leg in order to deliver another crushing kick. The next moment he succeeded in doing it perfectly, which caused the main character to start losing his balance. Kang Pil-du flew back with a crash and fell to the floor. It seemed that the protagonist was uneven with his brother and therefore he would lose this fight. Kang Mu asked if the company's top brass could tolerate a subordinate like his brother. Meanwhile, the main character was breathing heavily, overcoming the pain and trying to come to his senses while sitting on the floor. The second son asked his brother just not to tell him that he came just to have fun with his older brother, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, and didn't say that they needed to have a good fight first. Still breathing heavily, Kang Pil-du slowly rose to his feet. It seemed that the guy had no strength left at all. After that, he looked angrily at his brother and criticized his punch, saying that he felt almost nothing, and asked him to hit as if his life was at stake. Kang Mu was angered by these words. The guy was surprised that his younger brother still had the strength to joke, and said that while he was gone, he did not waste time. The second son rushed to attack again. Kang Pil-du was already prepared to endure the pain from the coming blow, because he did not have the strength to defend himself. Kang Mu could punch his younger brother in the face without resistance. It looked more like a beating than a fight. However, the guy was not going to stop and decided to attack with his knee. The next moment, Kang Mu grabbed his brother and hit him in the stomach with all his might. The main character could not restrain himself from the sharp pain and screamed loudly. Kang Mu decided to continue and swung his hand again to hit his younger brother. A powerful blow to the face caused a flash to appear in the protagonist's eyes. Kang Pil-du immediately began to try to dodge the next blow, as he needed a little respite. The boy deftly jumped back, moving to a safe distance from his older brother. Kang Mu, seeing his work, said that the main character was lucky, because if he had hit properly, the guy would have collected himself piece by piece. For a moment there was absolute silence in the room. It was broken when a small drop of scarlet blood fell to the floor. This blood belonged to Kang Pil-du, whose nose was broken after his older brother's last attack. Without taking his eyes off his opponent, the protagonist without a doubt straightened his own nose. Kang Mu rudely asked how long his younger brother would continue to defend himself. He continued to say that they were just wasting time, and suggested that the guy go straight to his mommy. Kang Pil-du continued to retreat back, not noticing that he had nowhere else to retreat, because a large shelf blocked his path. Looking back, the main character saw a screwdriver lying on the shelf, after which he asked if the old brother wanted to go to the next world himself. Kang Pil-du waved his hand as if beckoning his opponent to him, and asked if his brother would become more serious and start fighting to the death. Kang Mu got very angry and called the main character a son of a bitch who knew no bounds. Meanwhile, there was a night silence outside. Only thanks to a small lamp could one see anything. Someone was watching the exit from the factory closely, as if waiting for the iron door to finally open. The man sat in the car and reported to his boss that the brothers had met, but no one had come outside yet. After that, he listened to the order of the chief and said that they would continue surveillance. The person on the other end asked if everything was going according to plan. The subordinate replied that everything was under control and there was nothing to worry about. He recalled recent events and reported that the second son clearly understood that he was dealing with an influential person. This was possible thanks to a pass slipped to him in time, which indicated that Kang Mu was being watched by her older brother. After this, the subordinate asked his boss what they should do next and suggested continuing to observe. The man who was currently in the nightclub declined this offer. He said that it would be bad if he saw men, and it was better not to joke with someone like that. Kang Tae-gu suggested that his subordinates sit out the situation for a couple of days in some safe place. The guy asked them to consider that they had already earned enough for an unscheduled vacation, after which he ended the conversation. Having received good news, the third son decided to treat himself to a cigarette. He was pleased with himself and assumed that the universe itself was on his side. After that, he began to mock the protagonist for going there alone. The subordinate, who had been in the room the whole time, asked if it wasn't dangerous for them to be there, and suggested that if Kang Mu caught him, they would be corpses. Kang Tae-gu didn't understand who they were talking about. The man explained that he was talking about Kang Pil-du and asked if his boss didn't want to grab him himself. The third son did not understand what his subordinate was hinting at and rudely asked why he was so concerned about the main character's skin. The man became nervous when he saw that his boss did not like this conversation and immediately asked for forgiveness. Kang Tae-gu asked why his subordinate was spoiling his mood. The man replied that the guy himself knew very well what kind of person Mr. Kang Mu was. Exhaling his third cigarette smoke, the son began to tell about what happened in the warehouse last time. Then his older brother single-handedly dealt with the entire gang and remained completely safe and sound. The dirty ashtray indicated that this night had been especially stressful for the third son. Kang Taegu Group stamped out the cigarette butt and then continued his story. The guy continued to say that his older brother was obsessed with fighting, but with Kang Pil-do it was a different story. No matter how, he always got what he wanted. For this reason, the third son considered his younger brother a psychopath and definitely knew that something irreparable was happening in the warehouse. Kang Mu rushed at his younger brother and swung his fist, intending to hit him hard again. Suddenly, the protagonist grabbed a screwdriver and tried to use it as a weapon against his opponent. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. Kang Mu clearly saw his younger brother's crazy gaze and the screwdriver that was aimed straight at his head. Kang Pil-do furiously rushed towards his brother. At this moment, time seemed to slow down. Kang Mu clearly saw his younger brother's mad gaze and the screwdriver that was aimed straight at his head. Kang Pil-do thought his younger brother was a psychopath and definitely knew that something irreparable was happening in the warehouse. Suddenly, Kang Pil-do stopped. Something was preventing him from finishing his attack. The screwdriver stopped a few centimeters from the second son's eye. Kang Mu managed to stop his brother in time. He said that he knew him well, and therefore this attack was too obvious for him. After this, the guy swung his leg sharply in order to attack the enemy in response. Having hit the main character in the stomach the second time, the son threw him far away from himself, and now he was safe. The guy grabbed his stomach, trying to cope with the incredible pain. Added to this was the disappointment of the failed surprise attack with the screwdriver. Looking at the screwdriver, Kang Mu found it funny because he always thought that only teenagers and complete idiots use tools in battle. After that, he rhetorically asked if it wasn't mean and added that even gangsters didn't do that. Now the second son understood why his mother had once sent the main character away from her. Kang Pil-do didn't like these words. Kang Mu was surprised that his younger brother, even knowing this, still came to him for help. After this, the second son threw the screwdriver aside so that the fight would be fair. "Look at your younger brother with a crazy look." Kang Mu said that it was in vain that he came here and nothing could be changed. After these words, Kang Pil-do looked away and suddenly noticed a bag. Kang Mu quickly approached his brother and shouted that he should not dare to turn away from him. He also said that he still had a lot of things to do, and therefore suggested finishing them quickly. Suddenly, the main character threw a handful of loose substance towards his approaching older brother. This dust hit Kang Mu straight, and so he had to stop his attack in order to protect his eyes. However, the dust still got into the second son's eyes, and now he couldn't open them. Kang Pil-do immediately realized that this was his chance, and without wasting any time, he swung his fist to attack his opponent. Kang Mu managed to take a defensive stance in time and deflect his younger brother's attack. Kang Pil-do decided not to give up, and so he swung his fist again to attack his brother in another place. Kang Mu was still in a defensive stance, so the blow didn't cause him any harm. The main character noticed that his older brother had lowered his hand and now part of his head was unprotected. Kang Pil-do did not hesitate and again tried to hit his second son, hoping for success. But it seemed like Kang Mu was playing with his brother, as he managed to defend himself from his attack again. For some time, loud sounds of blows continued to echo throughout the room, but eventually everything became quiet. Beads of sweat fell on the floor, indicating that one of the fighters was very exhausted by this fight. Kang Pil-do held his fist at the ready and breathed heavily, trying to recover from a series of unsuccessful attacks. Kang Mu still stood in a defensive combat stance as if nothing had happened and was ready to repel his younger brother's other attacks. Suddenly, he calmly asked if the main character had finished his dancing. After this, the guy looked angrily at his opponent and suggested that he should beat the guy until he felt pleasure from it. Clenching his fist tighter, Kang Pil-do decided to attack his older brother again, hoping that this attack would be successful. Suddenly, the main character noticed something that made him dumbfounded and his confidence wavered. Something flew in front of him at great speed, raising the air and scattering the dust around. Mu's movements were much faster, and so the boy was able to easily hit his younger brother. From the unexpected attack, the main character began to lose his balance and fall backwards. He hit the iron tanks with a crash but still managed to stay on his feet. Kang Mu said that there would be absolutely no benefit from him crippling his younger brother and suggested that he forget about his mother and work in the company. The guy continued to say that as soon as the main character started receiving money, all the problems would immediately be forgotten. He asked Kang Pil-do to just relax and do what his older brothers told him to do. The protagonist listened attentively to the guy and breathed heavily. Finally, he said that he hated doing dirty work and then put his hand on the valve. The guy continued to say that after checking the accounting reports of the Manhwa group, he found out that, due to a lack of money, garbage has not been disposed of properly lately. After this, the main character stated that storing waste in the factory and getting rid of it on rainy days was illegal. Kang Mu became indignant because even on the verge of death, the protagonist still remained a prosecutor. Holding the valve tightly, Kang Pil-do continued to say that according to the law, in such a case, a prison sentence of up to 7 years or a fine of 70 million won could be imposed. Kang Mu rudely replied that he did not understand anything from what was said above, but advised his younger brother to take his hands off the valve because it was expensive. Kang Pil-do grabbed the valve with both hands and then suggested explaining to his brother in simpler terms that the garbage belonged in the trash. The next moment, the main character began to turn the valve with sharp movements. Suddenly, the iron pipes began to rumble loudly, and the pressure gauge needles began to show excessive pressure in the system. Some dark gas began to escape from the large iron tanks. A loud whistling sound could be heard throughout the room, and the gas quickly spread around. Coughing and covering his mouth with his hand, Kang Mu scolded his younger brother for this act because this gas was toxic. But this did not stop the main character. Full of determination, he rushed to attack his opponent. Kang Mu was very surprised by this, because he himself could not even fully open his eyes because of the poisonous gas. Kang Pil-do approached his elder brother and swung his fist to attack him. The next moment, the second son struck, causing him to lose his balance. Kang Mu realized that even in such conditions he would have to fight, but this time not for fun, but to survive. The boy tried to attack his younger brother, but the main character managed to block this blow. Without wasting any time, Kang Mu struck his opponent again and hit him right on the head. Kang Pil-do was still able to continue the fight and swung his fist again without sparing his strength. Kang Mu no longer had the strength to take a defensive fighting stance, so he had to endure direct hits to the face. The fight continued for some time. The opponents exchanged blows but were unable to break each other's will. Meanwhile, the gas filled the room more and more, poisoning the brothers with toxic fumes. However, the brothers did not even think of stopping and again tried to attack each other. Kang Mu managed to hit the main character in the face, causing him to wince in pain. Kang Pil-do also managed to land a strong blow on his older brother. Both opponents lost their balance and flew back far from each other. An exhausted Kang Mu lay on the floor, unable to rise to his feet. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, because he heard some sounds, and realized that his younger brother was already approaching him. Kang Pil-do grabbed the screwdriver and tried to get to his feet in order to continue the fight. Kang Mu was angry that the main character still did not give up and continued to fight. Kang Pil-do rushed towards his elder brother with a furious cry, holding a screwdriver in his hand. The main character fell on the guy from above because he intended to finish everything right now. The guy immobilized his opponent and tried to stab him with a screwdriver in order to avenge his mother's death. Kang Mu tried his best to resist his younger brother, keeping his hands away from you. The next moment, the strength suddenly left the second son, causing a sharp screwdriver to plunge into his chest. Kang Mu felt that he was losing this retreat, and so he loudly asked the protagonist to stop. But Kang Pil-do decided to continue because he wanted to get the information he needed from his older brother. A loud scream echoed throughout the room. After this, the main character, with rage in his eyes, loudly demanded that his older brother tell him who killed his mother. After some time, absolute silence reigned in the third warehouse. Someone slowly approached the large iron gates because they wanted to leave this ill-fated place as soon as possible. Suddenly, the gates began to open and clouds of toxic gas immediately burst out into the street. Immediately behind him, a bloody hand appeared on the street, which belonged to the winner of the fierce battle. Exhausted, but just as formidable, Kang Pil-do leaned on the iron gate and tried to get out into the fresh air as quickly as possible. Kang Pil-do fell on his older brother from above and with fury in his eyes, loudly demanded that he tell him who killed his mother. After some time, absolute silence reigned in the third warehouse. Someone slowly approached the large iron gates because they wanted to leave this ill-fated place as soon as possible. Suddenly, the gates began to open and clouds of toxic gas immediately burst out into the street. Immediately behind him, a bloody hand appeared on the street, which belonged to the winner of the fierce battle. Exhausted, but just as formidable, Kang Pil-do leaned on the iron gate and tried to get out into the fresh air as quickly as possible. The main character stopped to catch his breath and come to his senses. He didn't stay long, and after a minute, he headed out of this factory as quickly as possible. But the guy was not the only one who wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible. Dragging his feet, Kang Mu also headed towards the exit. Holding on to the door, the guy stopped to catch his breath and come to his senses after the recent fight. The second son, clutching his wound, scolded his younger brother and said that he would not get away with this. After this, Kang Mu went to look for his guard and secretary. At this time, someone was watching him from a nearby parked car. The side window rolled down and it became clear that Kang Tae-gu was sitting in the car, having come to check how the brothers' meeting had gone. Bloody marks on the wall indicated that Kang Mu had passed through here recently. The guy called his subordinates and ordered them to come to him quickly and reported that the main character had escaped. He also ordered to gather everyone at headquarters and catch Kang Pil-du along with the traitor Choi, Chong-sun. The guy emphasized that his subordinates should bring them to him and not kill them, and that they should do it as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the second son felt a sharp pain in his back, and his white shirt was splashed with scarlet blood. Out of surprise and in severe pain, Kang Mu dropped the phone. The subordinate on the other end did not understand what had happened to the director. Kang Tae-gu literally stabbed his older brother in the back and covered his mouth so that he wouldn't make any unnecessary sounds. The third son held the sharp knife tightly in his hand and was pleased that he had finally done it. At the same time, Kang Tae-gu scolded the main character for not being able to deal with one asshole, and now he had to finish all the work. Kang Mu was shocked to see his brother and tried to say something to him, but his mouth was covered by the hand of his third son. Kang Tae-gu was surprised that his older brother still considered him his subordinate and said that in the end, for the sake of his plan, the guy would have to die right here. Suddenly, the voice of the second son's secretary was heard calling his boss and asking where he was. Kang Mu tried with all his might to call his subordinates for help, but Kang Tae-gu firmly held the boy's mouth closed. "Let's finish quickly." The third son thrust the knife even deeper into his older brother's back. From the incredible pain that the sharp knife was causing, Kang Mu began to lose consciousness. The next moment, Kang Tae-gu abruptly pulled the knife out of the wound, causing a stream of blood to gush out. The second son began to quickly lose strength. Kang Mu fell to the ground in exhaustion while his younger brother watched with genuine pleasure. At that moment, the director's subordinates ran up to him and, not understanding what had happened, asked if the guy was okay. As soon as the men saw Kang Tae-gu, they were very surprised because they did not understand why he was here. The third son immediately began to scold his subordinates for letting Kang Pil-du go and pretended that he was trying to help his wounded brother. The subordinates explained that someone had suddenly knocked them out. Kang Tae-gu held his brother's wound and began to grieve, asking what had happened to his brother while he was here all alone. The boy asked his brother to come to his senses and cursed Kang Pil-du for treating his own brother like that. The guard and the second son's secretary were shocked by what was happening and, dumbfounded, did not know what to do. Kang Tae-gu ordered the men to quickly call an ambulance and threatened that they would all die if his older brother did not survive. The men immediately obeyed and called for help, while the third son asked his brother to be patient a little longer. Kang Mu, with his last bit of strength, quietly said that it didn't matter what kind of scene his brother was making here, because he would never be able to get the Songhua group. After this, the guy added that he had already told Kang Pil-du everything about who was behind his mother's death. The secretary and the security guard heard that their boss was still conscious and were very surprised and hoped that everything was not so bad. Kang Tae-gu noticed this. He was angry at his brother's words and decided to take his anger out on his subordinates. He yelled at them for doing nothing and just standing there with their mouths open, and ordered them to quickly go outside and look for the nearest ambulance. The guy added that he would look after his brother and ordered that when the medics arrived, his subordinates should quickly send them here. After this, the guy acted out a scene as if he was very worried about the fate of his older brother and even began to cry. The subordinates quickly ran away to look for help, leaving their boss and his younger brother alone. Once the audience left, and there was no one left to perform the show for, Kang Tae-gu relaxed and showed his true feelings for his brother. The next moment, the boy looked angrily at his older brother and asked him to stop worrying about him because he should be worrying about his own life. After this, the third son began to strangle Kang Mu, who was unable to resist it. Finally, Kang Tae-gu added that Kang Pil-du would soon follow his older brother. After some time, everything ended because Kang Mu exhaled for the last time, after which the silence of the night reigned. In a large estate far from the noisy metropolis, the lights were still on despite the late hour. Bright light from the room penetrated into the dark corridor and gave the opportunity to appreciate the minimalist design of a traditional Korean house. There were various treats on the table and the hot food filled the room with its pleasant aroma. The good-natured host carefully poured strong alcohol into a beautiful sake cup for his guest. Kanchavu assured his father that he would like this liquor, since it took a lot of time to prepare it. Kanildo began to carefully examine the drink offered by his son. The man agreed with his son's words and noted that this alcohol was even different in color from regular alcohol. After that, he assumed that he would not be able to remember its taste because after he entered politics, he drank only cheap alcohol. The man then said that he had to somehow thank his son for the good alcohol and asked what he wanted here. Kanchavu began to deny it, saying that he simply had some quality alcohol and that he had not seen his father for a long time. Khan Ildo immediately realized that the guy was dodging the answer and said that men did not talk like that. He then said that if he could help his son in any way, he would do everything possible. For a while, there was absolute silence in the room. Kang Chavu still couldn't bring himself to ask his father for anything. Finally, he began to talk about how there had been unrest among the management lately and suggested that they were fussing over the impossibility of resolving one complicated case. So the boy asked his father to come to the next shareholders meeting and help sort this out. He was about to continue talking about the company's business, but suddenly he stopped because someone knocked on the door. The door swung open and a man in a black suit entered the room and quickly walked towards Kang Ildo. He leaned towards his boss and quietly said something in his ear. Meanwhile, another man appeared near the door. He approached Kang Chav and quietly reported the latest news to Kang Ildo, who was thinking about what had happened. An oppressive atmosphere hung in the room. The news was not pleasant, so Kang Ildo took out a cigarette to light it. Kang Ildo never touched the expensive alcohol that his eldest son had thoughtfully poured for him. Looking angrily at Kanchava, the man offered him a drink for the last time. Kang Ildo assumed that everyone in the company was fussing because there was not much time left before the elections, but instead of helping, they only humiliated him in the eyes of society. Kang Chavu asked his father for forgiveness and said that he should have personally taken care of those below him. The next moment, Kang Ildo put out his cigarette, dipping it into the expensive alcohol, thus showing disrespect to the owner of the house. After this, the man began to get ready to leave while Kanchavu sat with his head bowed. Kang Ildo turned to his secretary and asked him to make sure that the latest news concerning his family did not leak out. The man immediately obeyed the order. As he was leaving, Kang Ildo asked his son what he was managing, if he couldn't even cope with his younger brothers, after which he called him a pathetic bastard. These words really hurt Kang Chawa. He became very angry, but did not dare to say a word to his father. Finally, Kang Ildo decided to give his foolish eldest son some advice. The man said that if he needed something from a person, it shouldn't have been alcohol. He continued to say that it was necessary to give what the person needed most at the moment. After this, the door to the room closed, and Khan Chavu was left completely alone with his thoughts. Suddenly, he reached to the other end of the table to grab a cup of alcohol. Seeing a cigarette butt floating in the drink, the man squeezed the cup tightly out of anger caused by his father's words. The next moment, the eldest son abruptly drank the entire contents, taking only one sip. The guy did not disdain to swallow even a cigarette butt, which symbolized that he completely obeyed his father and ignored humiliation. After this, Kang Chawu put the cup down on the table with a bang. Only this broke the absolute silence that filled the room. For some time, the guy sat silently in thought, and suddenly the swing door behind him opened. In the next room, the loyal subordinates of the first son were resting. Khan Chavu said that thanks to his father, he now looked like an empty and wet place in front of the mini. Then the man turned to his subordinates and said that since they had heard everything, they should bring him what he wanted. That same night, Kang Moon was taken to a hospital owned by the Sunhwa Group. The burning red light indicated that a fight for the life of the second son was taking place in the operating room. After some time, the lamp went out, which meant that the operation was completed. Suddenly, the door to the operating room opened and a man began to emerge from it, who was obliged to report the results of the operation. The surgeon in the bloody gown took off his mask and addressed the people who had been waiting in the corridor all this time. The men in black suits immediately fell silent and began to listen attentively to the doctor, who was reporting that the operation on patient Kang Mu was successful. All the men breathed a sigh of relief when they heard this good news. They immediately informed their bosses that the operation was successful, but not everyone was happy to hear this news. Kang Tegu was very unhappy that his older brother survived because it meant that he would soon be in very big trouble. A new day has arrived. Rays of bright sunshine illuminated the hospital corridors and wards. Someone was walking down the corridor carrying treats with wishes for a speedy recovery. They were intended for Kang Moon. Kang Tegu approached his older brother's room and saw several men in black suits and Choi Chon-soon. They were on duty outside the ward, not letting in suspicious visitors. The third son was not surprised at all and continued to walk forward to visit his older brother. Approaching the door, the guy stopped to talk to his friend. He asked the men who were standing at the door why they were so sad, since they were not at a funeral. Choi Chong-sun greeted his boss's younger brother Kang Taegu, noticed that the guy had a broken leg, and asked what kind of trouble he got into. Choi Chong-sun replied that it was nothing because he just fell awkwardly. Kang Taegu was surprised by this, but then he gave the guy the basket of treats, saying that there was no one to eat it anyway. After this, the guy opened the door and began to enter the ward. The men bowed respectfully after him. The third son closed the doors behind him so that no one would interfere with him visiting his brother. Entering inside, he looked around. The IV was filled with the best medicines that would help Kang Mu recover faster. Modern devices recorded the heartbeat of Kang Taegu's second son. He thought that his older brother had settled in well here. The guy remembered that when he was stabbed, he was shoved into a cramped room that was designed for 4 patients. But right there was not a ward, but an entire hotel room. After that, he finally plucked up his courage and approached his brother who was lying unconscious. Kang Taegu turned to him and asked him to stop lying there and answer him something because the guy looked like he heard everything but didn't want to talk to him. The third son assumed that his brother would put a spoke in his wheel until the very end. Kang Mu did not respond. Only the device that recorded the boy's heartbeat made piercing sounds. Then Kang Taegu thought that it would be difficult, but he suggested that he could kill his brother right here. Mu's heart began to beat faster, which was recorded by the device. The third son thought that his brother was scared and hastened to calm him down, saying that these were just thoughts out loud, because outside there was a whole crowd of the second son's subordinates. The guy calmly continued to say that he came here only out of curiosity. He then said that no matter how you think about it, Kang Pildu had no reason to leave his older brother alive, so he was interested in what they talked about when they met. The next moment, Kang Mu's finger suddenly twitched. It seemed that the boy had heard everything and wanted to answer his younger brother. At that very moment, the device began to record an increased heart rate, which it reported with a piercing sound signal. Very soon, several worried doctors ran into the room and headed towards their patient. Kang Taegu decided that his conversation with his brother was over and headed towards the exit. The guy said that he understood that the second son did not want to talk to him and therefore asked him to forget about it because he himself would find Kang Pildu and ask him everything. The third son walked out into the hospital parking lot and slowly walked toward his car. Suddenly, someone from inside opened the back door. Kang Taegu immediately jumped up and quickly ran to the car. The guy sat in the back seat and then slammed the door behind him. Kang Taegu timidly looked at the man who was sitting next to him. He never expected to see him here. This man turned out to be Kang Chavu, who had been waiting here for a long time for his brother Kang Taegu, asked why he was here, and said that he himself could come to him. The first son replied that he wanted to do so, but his younger brother was a busy man and was walking around somewhere all day. After this, he added that the person who had the greatest need should have come to the meeting first. Kang Chavu decided to get down to business and said that, according to the doctors, even if Kang Mu wakes up, it will be difficult for him to return to his normal life. Kang Taegu replied that it was not surprising because his brother had lost a lot of blood. The guy suggested that if he had found him a little later, they would have met at the funeral. Kang Chavu agreed with this and suggested that judging by the method, the killer planned to finish off his second son since the knife hit him right in the lung. The guy continued to say that the man who had fallen completely managed to do so with one blow, and therefore he clearly knew how to handle a knife. After these words, Kang Taegu became very nervous and began to bite his fingernails. The first son continued to say that the killer planned to kill Kang Mu quietly and quickly, in secret from everyone. Kang Taegu carefully looked at his brother. Then Kang Chavu said that the problem was that the Kang Pildu he knew would not have done this because this method did not suit him. The first son continued to say that this method was usually used by Kang Taegu. From these words, the boy's heart began to beat rapidly. Meanwhile, Kang Chavu continued to say that it was he who taught his younger brother how to handle a knife, and that is why he knew his methods. Kang Taegu's sense of anxiety grew faster and faster, and his heart was about to jump out of his chest. Suddenly, the first son began to tear up the documents that he had been holding in his hands all this time. Having thrown away the unnecessary waste paper, Kang Chavu began to scold the doctors for not being able to decide what would happen to his brother, but the company could not remain in limbo. After that, the guy turned to Kang Taegu and, tightly clenching his fists, told him to go to work at the company's main office tomorrow. Getting out of the car, Kang Chavu added that nothing good would happen if Kang Mu's seat remained empty for too long. Suddenly he stopped because he remembered something and decided to warn his brother just in case. Kang Taegu was still very nervous and bit his nails because he was afraid of hearing direct accusations of an attempt on his older brother's life. Kang Chawu looked menacingly at his brother and ordered him not to do stupid things behind his back. After that, he slammed the door loudly, leaving his third son alone with his thoughts. As soon as his brother left, Kang Taegu immediately exhaled and looked with horror at the trail of his first son leaving, thinking that his heart almost sank into his heels. The guy grabbed his head and began to calm himself down by saying that his older brother still had no evidence that he did it. The third son wondered if Kanchawu really knew something or if he was just testing him. Very soon, the guy breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that one way or another he had managed to get into the company's main office. Suddenly, someone called Kang Taegu. The guy quickly took out his phone from his jacket to check who it was. He saw that his loyal subordinate, who was listed in his contacts as a pawn, was calling him. The guy immediately answered the call. Kang Taegu told his subordinate that he called just in time because he was just about to tell him the good news and ordered him to pack his things in his office today. Kang Taegu happily announced that they were moving to the main office tomorrow, after which he laughed and said that this is why he should have been trusted. For some reason, there was no response from the other end. The third son asked his subordinate if he had heard him. The subordinate's loud apologies echoed through the long corridors, which were filled with the mutilated bodies of men in black suits. The man told his boss that Kang Pil-do had come to their office looking for something and had turned everything upside down while the third son was away. The next moment, the protagonist punished the man for his disrespect by kicking him in the face. Kang Taegu listened in horror to the screams of his subordinate on the other end and was angry that he could not change anything. Kang Pil-do picked up the phone and told his brother that now he understood why it was so difficult to meet him, since he had transferred to the main office. The main character knew that his brother had wanted to go there for a long time and congratulated him on this. On this occasion, the guy decided to send Kang Tae a gift. Kang Pil-do took the phone away from his ear and started sending some message to his older brother. A moment later, Kang Taegu received a message and opened the file his brother had sent him with horror. It turned out that the main character did not leave the warehouse immediately, but decided to stay for a while and watch his brother. As soon as he saw that Kang Taegu attacked Kang Mu, he immediately took out his phone to capture it on camera. The bloody hand could barely hold the phone, but Kang Pil-do was content with just one photo. I saw a photo of him stabbing his older brother Kang Taegu in the back, and I got really angry and couldn't believe that the main character had been following him from the very beginning. The third son could not control his emotions and therefore loudly shouted about how he hated his younger brother because this photo posed a serious threat to him. Hearing this, the main character said that he was glad that his brother liked his gift. After that, the guy asked if he should have delivered the photo to the company's main office himself. Having sat down in a comfortable chair like he was the owner, Kang Pil-do suggested another option to his brother. The main character said that the third son could have come here himself in order to sort everything out with him. Kang Pil-do asked Kang Taegu whether he should have delivered the photo to the company's headquarters himself. After that, sitting down in a comfortable chair like a boss, Kang Pil-do said that the third son could have come here himself to sort everything out with him. Pressing the gas pedal to the floor, Kang Taegu quickly sped through the night metropolis, trying to get to his younger brother as quickly as possible. Luckily, the road that led in the right direction was completely empty, and no one bothered him. Bright advertising signs indicated that night in this city was no reason to sleep. After some time, the third son safely reached his night establishment and stopped at the side of the road. Here, a man in a black suit was already waiting for him, surrounded by athletically built guys. Kang Taegu got out of the car and was very surprised why there were no other of his many subordinates here besides them. He did not understand where the rest of the guys could have gone and ordered that everyone who could come be gathered immediately. The man in the black suit tried to justify himself by saying that the boss's order had taken them by surprise, and that in the meantime he had called together all the important guys he knew. Kang Taegu quickly headed towards the entrance of the nightclub, scolding his subordinates for carelessly following his orders. The guy was in such a hurry that he didn't notice the puddle and slipped and began to lose his balance. The third son fell into a puddle in front of his subordinates and tried to come to his senses for some time. Indignant at the unpleasant incident, the guy asked his subordinate where everyone else was. The man began to hesitantly tell that today there was an event in the club in honor of the opening, and that is why everyone left for the region. He then tried to explain that the event was expensive and therefore no one wanted to waste money, but suddenly blood started coming out of his mouth. It turned out that Kang Taegu, who was dissatisfied with his subordinate, suddenly took out a knife and cut the man's cheek. He immediately screamed in pain. The man who had received his punishment fell to his knees and covered the bleeding wound with his hands. Kang Taegu continued to scold his wayward subordinate, asking how he could decide that some event was more important now, since Kang Pil-do was inside the establishment. The other men looked with fear at the third son, who ordered everyone who had left to quickly gather. The guy looked at the entrance to the karaoke bar and thought that he couldn't just stand there and wait, but at the same time breaking in was too risky. Kang Taegu was angry because he didn't know what he could do now. After this, he loudly addressed his subordinates and asked why they froze like sheep and ordered them to take their weapons and go inside. The men immediately obeyed the order and began taking baseball bats from the trunk of the car. A moment later, they were ready and began to hurriedly enter the karaoke bar. I don't know what kind of danger awaited them there. Suddenly, Kang Tae-gu turned to the two men in black suits and stopped them, saying that they didn't need to go there because it was enough that they sent those idiots there. The men looked at their boss with incomprehension, because they knew that those guys did not have enough strength to cope with the main character. Kang Tae-gu looked at his subordinates and said that there was only one way out anyway. He continued to say that there was no need to climb into this pigsty, because if the guys inside do everything well, then Kang Pil-do will get out of there himself. According to the third son's plan, it is then that he and his subordinates will capture the main character. At this time, the lights were still on at the headquarters of the Manhwa group, and the expensive car parked in the parking lot indicated that the management was still at work. A young man in a black suit creaked open the door and entered the spacious room. He quickly buttoned his jacket to look presentable before meeting with his boss. After that, he bowed respectfully to the man standing with his back to him, who seemed not to notice his arrival. But this was not the case. Kanchavu was surprised that the guy came to him because he knew that he usually didn't even stick his nose out of his office. That guy was the head of the business support department of the Sunhwa group, named So Nambong. He said that he had received the latest news that Kang Tae-gu had been called to work at the headquarters. Kang Chavu confirmed this and said that it would not be good if his younger brother's place remained empty for a long time in the midst of work. The guy continued to say that, moreover, these were the rules of this company, namely, the empty space was transferred to the next relative. At the same time, the formidable-looking first son carefully looked after his houseplant. The silence that reigned in the room only helped him in this. Suddenly, the guy looked at his silent subordinate and asked if he really had his eye on the empty seat. So Nambong began to deny it, because he could not possibly dare to covet such a thing. The guy explained that he was simply expressing concern. He continued to say that his boss had a reason for keeping Kang Tae-gu away from the business, and so he was worried if everything would be okay if he trusted him. Kang Cha-woo agreed with the guy and said that if Kang Mu was an obedient hunting dog, then Kang Tae-gu was like a mad mongrel that was difficult to tame. The guy continued to say that such a dog needed a chain to keep him from doing stupid things. So Nambong said that in his opinion, the position of chief was already too much. Kang Cha-woo asked his subordinate to understand that by working in the company, he also learned something, and he would not have appointed Kang Tae-gu if he was only worried about an empty position. Sprawled in a comfortable chair, the first son said meaningfully that he should keep his enemy close to him. Moreover, the guy assumed that suddenly, having sat in the boss's chair, his uncontrollable younger brother would turn into a completely different person. After this, Kang Chavu asked his subordinate to take a look at himself, because now he looked like an ordinary office plankton in a suit despite his past. The first son lit a cigarette and asked the boy not to worry about Kang Tae-gu because he would figure it out himself. The guy thought that with time they would definitely understand whether his younger brother would be of any use. So Nambong asked if his boss was going to entrust Kang Tae-gu with Kang Pil-du's case and offered to handle the matter himself. The guy explained that there was no need to distract the third son of yours in order to catch one young master. Kang Cha-woo thought about these words. Songhwa group could depend on just one person. At this time, armed guys with baseball bats entered the karaoke bar and were stunned by surprise. They saw how furiously Kang Pil-du was beating one of their comrades and were therefore afraid to approach him. The main character was breathing heavily from fatigue because this was not his first defeated enemy today. The men in tracksuits finally realized that they outnumbered their opponents, and so they rushed to attack, hoping that the guy wouldn't be able to hold out for long. Kang Pil-du assumed a confident fighting stance and prepared to repel the blows of his opponents. From the outside, it seemed that the main character was completely unable to fight, while the energetic guy had already swung his weapon. The baseball bat flew at high speed straight towards Kang Pil-du's head and was about to cause him irreparable damage. But the main character thought differently, and gathering all his strength, rushed at the enemy with lightning speed and neutralized him with one precise blow. This was followed by an inevitable attack on the next enemy, who did not even have time to do anything. Only one of the men managed to hit the protagonist on the shoulder with a baseball bat. But not only did this not harm Kang Pil-du, but it also seemed to give him strength for the next attack. The next moment, the guy attacked the vile enemy in the face with all his might, causing the ringing sound of the blow to echo through the corridor. Kang Pil-du stopped for a while to catch his breath. Behind him on the floor lay his defeated opponents, and in front of him stood a man who, after seeing what he saw, did not dare to attack. The blood-stained protagonist raised his head and looked at the remaining enemy with a bloodthirsty gaze. The man grabbed the baseball bat with trembling hands and didn't know what to do next. The next moment, he made the only right decision and ran as fast as he could into the street, away from the main character. Kang Taegu and his beautiful subordinate saw the guy trying to run out of the karaoke bar, even though it had only been a short time since the group of men had entered. The guy sped up when he heard that the main character was running after him, because he didn't even think about letting his opponent go unharmed. Seeing the boss, the guy screamed for help, but it was too late. He never managed to leave the karaoke bar in time. Kang Taegu and his subordinates immediately realized that the main character had already dealt with everyone who was inside the establishment and was now heading towards them. A moment later, a silent dark silhouette appeared at the entrance and calmly walked towards the third son. The men immediately rushed to attack in order to block the path of the main character. They decided not to play out a valiant battle, and therefore both attacked one enemy at the same time. However, this did not stop the main character from first dodging the attack of one of the men and then hitting him back. The second man decided not to lag behind his partner and already swung his fist in order to attack Kang Pildu, thinking that in this way he would catch the guy off guard. Suddenly, the main character stepped aside at great speed, causing the man to miss and begin to lose his balance. For a moment, the third son's subordinate was stunned, not understanding what had just happened. With a powerful kick to the face, the protagonist was able to bring the man to his senses and thus clear the way to his younger brother. After this, Kang Pildu finally met the gaze of his older brother, who did not let go of the knife and began to slowly approach him. Kang Taegu was very angry and looked at his relative with hatred because he had been causing him a lot of trouble lately. After the recent fight, Kang Pildu was breathing heavily and trying to come to his senses because his business was still not finished. Approaching his older brother, the main character said that if he didn't like his gift, he could have told him directly about it. After that, he looked angrily at his third son for choosing to hide like a coward behind other people's backs. Approaching his older brother, whom he had not seen for so long, Kang Pildu asked what was the matter and assumed that the guy did not like his gift. The main character looked at his third son with disdain and noted that he looked as if he was about to stab him with a knife, just like he did with his brother Kang Mu. The guy couldn't believe that Kang Taegu wanted to get into the main office so much that he resorted to such meanness. But he didn't blame him. After this, Kang Pildu asked his brother what would happen if the company suddenly found out about his antics. After these words, the third son tightly clutched the knife in his hand. It was not without reason. The next moment, the guy swung his weapon with great speed in order to immediately finish off his brother. Kang Pildu managed to take a step back in time and avoid the sharp knife that flashed past his eyes. The blade's sharpness was evidenced by the fact that it was able to easily cut through the thick fabric of the main character's black jacket. When the knife didn't help, Kang Taegu's fist came into play. He tried to hit his younger brother, but he managed to defend himself. However, the blow was so powerful that it threw the main character back and almost knocked him off his feet. Without wasting any time, the third son swung his knife again, trying to inflict as much injury on his opponent as possible. After this, the main character's jacket was completely ruined, because no studio could have mended such cuts. Kang Pildu saw that his older brother was swinging his blade again, and so the guy urgently needed to do something in order not to repeat the fate of the jacket. The main character deftly hit his opponent in the elbow, thereby preventing him from doing what he had planned. From this technique, Kang Taegu's hand weakened and dropped the knife. But being a true master in the ability to wield this weapon, the guy deftly grabbed it in his other hand. Taking advantage of the fact that his younger brother's hands were now busy, the third son swung his blade again. The next moment, a sharp knife whistled through the air as the main character managed to duck down in time. Kang Taegu had no intention of giving up, so he decided to continue attacking in the hopes that he would be able to seriously injure his opponent. After this, the third son delivered a whole series of blows, from which the main character had only to quickly dodge. Having gotten a little used to his younger brother's clever dodges, Kang Taegu could confidently say that Kang Pildu was not holding up in a fight the same way as before. The guy was sure that given the current state of the main character, he would be able to cut him up, and so it turned out. In the next moment, Kang Taegu rushed forward with lightning speed, cutting his younger brother's side in the process. Despite the success, the third son decided to consolidate the good results and swung the knife again, but suddenly stopped. He turned to his younger brother and smugly said that he had become much more clumsy than he had been before. In addition, the guy noticed that his opponent was wearing a bulletproof vest that was visible through his cut shirt, and thought that it was unfair. In fact, it was not a bulletproof vest, but a real iron chainmail that had already saved the main character from serious injuries more than once in this fight. Kang Taegu guessed that his younger brother had finally learned what fear was, and that was why he was so prepared before fighting him. The third son honestly admitted that at first he was scared because he thought that the main character was in his previous form. The guy didn't understand why everyone around him was trying so hard to convince him of their strength, but he assumed that as soon as he hit them with a knife, his opponents wouldn't even open their mouths. After this, being completely confident in himself, the elder brother again rushed at Kang Pil-du. Swinging his knife, the guy got closer and closer to the main character, intending to end this fight right now. At the same time, he was shouting and getting angry because Kang Pil-du had shown up right now and was starting to interfere with his plans, even though he could have lived and kept a low profile. The knife that Kang Taegu held in his hand was already ready to plunge into the flesh and taste the blood of its victim. With a stern face, Kang Pil-du assumed a fighting stance and tightly clenched his fists, putting them in front of him, showing his opponent that he was not willing to give up so easily. The next moment, with a sweeping movement, Kang Taegu attacked his younger brother, who managed to react in time and dodge. The main character seemed to have planned all this in advance, and taking advantage of the moment, attacked the third son with his foot. A precise kick hit Kang Taegu's arm, causing it to instantly become weak and unresponsive. The knife flew off at great speed, leaving its owner completely unarmed. Without wasting time, the main character swung his fist to convince his older brother that he was in bad shape. The first attack hit the third son straight in the face, causing him to lose control of the situation and doom himself to a series of failures. The guy had not yet had time to recover from the previous attack when suddenly a second blow flew into the stomach at great speed, which made it difficult for Kang Taegu to breathe. A moment later, the protagonist delivered the final blow to the jaw. After that, Kang Taegu began to lose his balance and slowly lean back, trying to stay on his feet. Everything happened so quickly that the knife that the main character knocked out of his opponent's hand was only now returning to the ground. Kang Taegu saw his sharp blade spinning in the air and quickly falling down. The guy put out his hand in the hope of deftly grabbing it and regaining his advantage in the fight. The next moment, the knife returned to the hand of its owner, who clutched it tightly, afraid of losing it again. Feeling confident in himself, Kang Taegu began to quickly come to his senses and straighten his back in order to attack the main character. Suddenly, both opponents froze in place, because in the blink of an eye, a sharp knife appeared at Kang Pil-du's neck. It seemed that this was an unconditional victory for the third son. Kang Taegu said that if it were up to him, he would gladly kill his younger brother right now, but he couldn't do it here because there was no point in it. But the guy quickly changed his mind, saying that if he let the main character go alive, he would definitely make a scandal, and it would be easier for him to bury his brother here and now. Kang Pil-du said that killing him would not give his brother the opportunity to take over the company. After that, he asked him not to deceive himself, because it would be good if the guy did not lose Kang Moo's place. Kang Taegu didn't understand what his brother was getting at. The main character continued to say that the guy, like no one else, knew that even in a new place, they would continue to neglect him as before. These words touched the third son. He began to speak loudly about how Kang Pil-du knew nothing about him, after which he assumed that in this way he wanted to avoid death. The main character calmly asked his younger brother to think carefully about what exactly he wanted most. The next moment, Kang Pil-du suddenly grabbed the tip of the knife, not afraid of cutting himself. After this, the main character promised to give his older brother what he wanted so much. Of course, we were talking about the company Manhwa Group, and the seriousness of the main character's intentions was confirmed by his blood. The guy said that from the very beginning, his older brother wanted exactly this from him because he needed a scoundrel in his person who would raise a knife against the company. The brothers looked at each other in silence. For a while, there was absolute silence, broken only by the sounds of cars, because their opponents blocked their way. Kang Pil-du released the knife from his bloody hand, as if to say that he trusted his elder brother. After that, he headed to leave. Kang Taegu was surprised that the main character knew from the very beginning that he was using him. Suddenly, the boy loudly ordered his brother to stop, and in order to find out his motives, asked what he himself was trying to achieve. Kang Taegu guessed that there must have been some reason why the protagonist had been indulging him all this time. Kang Pil-du calmly replied that he had no ulterior motives and he just wanted to know who killed his mother. The third son was very surprised by this answer because he knew that his brother had already found enough information. After that, he asked if the culprit wasn't Kang Moo. Then the guy asked who it was, if not the older brother, because he knew for sure that Kang Moo told the main character everything. Kang Pil-du looked at his brother with a serious expression and said that it was not Kang Moo, and Kang Taegu himself would have to find out who was behind his mother's death at the main office. After this, the main character remembered a recent skirmish with his older brother that took place in the third warehouse of an abandoned factory. With a lot of effort, the guy managed to knock Kangmu to the ground and wound him with a sharp screwdriver. Pildu's intentions were so serious that he was ready to kill him, agreed to tell everything. The main character did not let go of his older brother until he heard him say once again that he would tell everything he knew. Only after this did Kang Pildu throw aside the bloody screwdriver with which he had almost killed his brother. After that, the guy immediately closed the valve. The pressure in the pipes immediately dropped, as indicated by the pressure gauge needle. Kangmu began his story by saying that he came to the underground surgical office solely on company business and had no plans to harm his mother. Kang Pildu demanded that his brother speak frankly, after which he asked why he personally came there if he was not the one who killed his mother. Gritting his teeth in anger, the second son said that this information would hardly interest the protagonist, but within the Manhwa group, there was a silent war. The guy said that the problems began when his father entered political circles, after which, one by one, those who aimed for the leadership chair began to appear in the company. Kanmu and Kanchavu were enough to deal with all sorts of small drawings, but the main problem was in the shares. The second son continued to say that his and his brother's share packages and the director's shares remaining were not enough. This was not enough to stand up to the old-timers who had been sitting in their chairs since the day the company was merged and had once worked under their father's leadership. These old-timers had enough power to take over the company and therefore would not kindly give up the chairman's chair to them and their brother. Kangmu assumed that if they did nothing, their right to manage the company would be taken away, and so they naturally could not stand aside. After that, the guy said that their father was the one who founded this company, but it was he and his brother who got it on its feet, so they decided to fight for it to the end. The old-timers noticed the actions they had taken and were unhappy with it, because it prevented them from taking over the company. Kangmu continued to say that if one of the forces wanted to completely take over the company, it would first try to take over all the shares. All the old-timers were trying their best to somehow pull this off, but it turned out not to be so simple. The one who owned the share package that could decide the fate of the company turned out to be the mother of the main character and his brothers. A new day had arrived. Several dozen men in black suits lined up outside the main office of the Manhwa group. They were waiting for the arrival of an important person. Very soon, a black expensive car drove up to the building. Its owner had long dreamed of being here in a new status. Kang Taegu got out of the car and looked at the multi-story buildings, remembering the words of Kang Pildu, with whom he spoke the day before. Then the main character voiced his guess to his brother that their mother was killed in order to seize her share package in the Manhwa group and take over the company. Kang Taegu smiled slyly and adjusted his tie. Today was the beginning of his new life, and he was ready for it. The third son began to confidently climb the steps heading towards the entrance of the company's main office. All the men in black suits bowed respectfully to their new boss. Pildu was watching all this from the roof of the neighboring building. He remembered well what he had recently said to his older brother. He then told his brother that if Kang Taegu wanted to take over the Manhwa group, he should find out who was involved in their mother's death. This was necessary so that the main character could kill them all to the last one and finally accomplish his revenge. Kang Taegu solemnly entered the company's main office. Kang Pildu was watching all this from the roof of the neighboring building. He remembered well what he had recently said to his older brother. He then told his brother that if Kang Taegu wanted to take over the Manhwa group, he should find out who was involved in their mother's death. This was necessary so that the main character could kill them all to the last one and finally accomplish his revenge. In one of the many offices of the company's main office, active work was in full swing. Mu's office now belonged to a new owner. The only reminder of the previous leader was a plaque with his name, but it didn't stay on the table for long. Someone's hand grabbed it in order to get rid of the unnecessary decoration. A moment later, the sign was in the trash can, along with the rest of the unnecessary things. Kang Taegu said that he expected that at least something would change in the main office, but he still felt sick watching them work. The guy continued to think that the owner of the office had changed, and therefore it was worth starting with cleaning, but the subordinate still needed to be taught everything. The third son silently approached the window in order to at least slightly distract himself from the hustle and bustle that was happening in the office. Only now did the guy understand why all the people were so obsessed with high-rise buildings, because the other houses looked like servants' quarters compared to them. Kang Taegu believed that a person should live by breathing in the upper air, and was pleased that he was able to get out of this dark dungeon and could now breathe deeply. The guy was amazed at how high he towered over the metropolis, and for the first time in his life, he even felt dizzy. The third son grabbed his head, not understanding what was wrong with him, and assumed that it was altitude sickness. The guy continued to look out the window, justifying himself by saying that he still couldn't get used to his new workplace. One of the subordinates asked if his boss was okay and offered to run and get him some medicine. Hearing this, Kang Tae-gu looked angrily at his subordinates as if they had insulted him with their words. The man immediately realized that he had said too much and, very worried, asked his boss for forgiveness. The guy headed towards his subordinates, saying that if they had gone with him to the main office, then they should have behaved accordingly. Also, the third son did not like the appearance of the men. The guy took all his money out of his wallet and ordered them to go to the mall and buy themselves a new suit. The men bowed respectfully to their boss, thanking him for his generosity. The guy ordered them to quickly leave here and carry out the order. The subordinates left the office, leaving the third son to settle into his new workplace. They closed the door behind them so that no one would disturb their boss. Sighing heavily, Kang Tae-gu began to complain that it was precisely because of this rabble that he could not get into the main office earlier. Then the guy ordered his secretary to take care of their upbringing. After this, the third son decided to get a cigarette in order to take a little break from the difficult move and routine affairs. Unexpectedly, Kang Tae-gu turned to the secretary again and asked if he had found out what he had asked him to do. The man handed his boss a stack of documents and said that he had just received them today. Kang Tae-gu was unhappy that his subordinate gave him documents in this form instead of some kind of tablet and ordered him to save paper. The man asked his boss for forgiveness for this and explained that he could not do anything about the defense. The third son continued to scold the secretary for looking like an old man and for being ashamed to walk next to him. The documents that were supposed to be disposed of contained personal files of some employees of the Manhwa group. Kang Tae-gu realized that he could only find out the details in person, but he knew for sure that these men were old-timers of the company. After that, the guy said that he expected this, but asked the secretary what was wrong with them. The man said that what was alarming was that they were all hired by his main office without education, experience, or any prospects. In addition, they all resigned on the same day. Suddenly, the third son asked when exactly these workers resigned, anticipating an answer he did not want to hear. The secretary hesitated for a moment, but then timidly replied that they were fired the day after Mrs. Khan's death. Kang Tae-gu was so shocked by these words that he dropped the cigarettes from his hands. For a while, there was absolute silence in the office. The third son crushed the cigarette butt with his foot, which indicated that he had come to his senses and accepted this information as fact. Looking at the documents, the guy was very unhappy that these scoundrels also got an unrealistic severance pay for what they did to you. Unexpectedly, the third son brought the documents to his nose and inhaled their smell deeply. The guy smiled slyly and summed up that it smelled rotten, meaning his suspicions that these workers were involved in the murder of his mother. After that, Kang Tae-gu bowed his head and began to think about something meticulously, while his secretary obediently stood to the side. Finally, he asked if everything was okay with the guy. Kang Tae-gu rudely asked him not to worry about him since he was doing it out of fun. While handing over the documents to his subordinate, the third son asked if the same Chinese hacker had stolen them. The man confirmed this and said that he started working as soon as he was given access to the main office servers, after which he asked if the boss wanted to assign the hacker anything else. Kang Tae-gu denied this and explained that he was simply curious to know what kind of person he was because he seemed reliable to him. Getting up from his chair, the guy added that he would like to recruit more guys like him and not these dumb jocks. After this, the guy ordered that as soon as the hacker arrived in Korea, the secretary should send him to him so that he could give him a full tour. The man obeyed his boss's order and then asked when he was supposed to deal with the guys on the list. Kang Tae-gu replied that the subordinate should have added pathos, since they did not rise to the main office to get involved in all sorts of dirty deeds. The guy added that now they only had to think about how to rise even higher. While contentedly looking at the cityscape, the third son concluded that Kang Pil-do would happily wave the knife in their place. For a while, silence reigned in the office again, as Kang Tae-gu began to seriously think about the upcoming prospects. Finally, he turned to the secretary and offered him something to eat because he was hungry. The man agreed with his boss. At that moment, a red LED on the plasma screen was glowing suspiciously. It was not just a small light bulb, but a real hidden camera that was recording the boss's personal conversation with his subordinate the whole time. Some time passed. In the quiet courtyard of a multi-story residential building, it seemed that nothing out of the ordinary could happen. There were few cars in the parking lot, but even among them there were those who violated parking rules. A conscientious worker pasted a sticker on the windshield of a car stating that parking for outsiders was prohibited here. Despite the fact that it was the middle of the day, the street was empty, and therefore no one interfered with the elderly man fulfilling his obligations. Suddenly someone spoke rudely to the old man, causing him to look away with an incomprehensible expression. A stocky, tattooed man was walking towards him, indignant that his grandfather was touching someone else's car, and ordered him to quickly remove the sticker. The old man tried to explain that it was a parking space for the disabled, and therefore the man could not park there. The man rudely said that it was a very expensive car, and he parked it there so that it would not be scratched in a regular parking lot. The man continued to say that he had parked there on purpose out of concern for others, and asked the old man to thank him for that, instead of pasting papers. The old man replied that he understood the man perfectly well, but asked him to at least park in a regular place for the sake of people with disabilities. The man was angry and tired of repeating everything to the old man, so he waved his hand so that he would understand him better. The elderly man was afraid that the man would hit him, and so he tried to cover himself with his hands. But the man no longer cared about the old man, because he saw something that made him even more angry. A car crashed into the man's car from behind. He immediately ran forward, cursing the culprit of the incident. The man leaned down to inspect the aftermath of the collision, and was very upset by what he saw. A large dent was visible on the rear wing of the car. The man became indignant because he had not even managed to pay off half of the loan for this car. Suddenly, the culprit of this traffic accident got out of his car and calmly went about his business. The tattooed man immediately blocked his path and demanded that he keep his apologies to himself, after which he decided that he would first hit him a couple of times. The guy in the black suit skillfully grabbed the aggressive man, preventing him from doing what he had planned. After this, he threw his opponent aside so that he would not interfere with his progress forward. As if nothing had happened, the guy in the black suit went about his business, leaving the man who didn't understand anything behind. The man was surprised that the culprit of the incident had done something wrong and was now running away from the scene of the crime, and rudely ordered him to return to him. But the guy didn't listen to him because he had another goal. He extended his hand to the older man, who didn't understand what the guy wanted from him. The next moment, the guy threw the old man to the side, breaking his head through the side window of one of the cars. Without letting go of the elderly man, the guy in the black suit swung his fist to hit him again. The old man did not understand what he was guilty of and asked his offender to let him go and talk to him first, but the guy did not listen to him and hit him in the face. Screaming in pain, the elderly man did not understand what was wrong with the guy and why he was attacking him. He loudly asked the guy to let him go and called people for help, asking that at least someone call the police. However, this did not stop the guy, and he hit the elderly man again. The crowd of people who gathered around watched what was happening in horror, not understanding what the reason for such aggression was, but at the same time, no one dared to intervene. The stocky man with tattoos had already taken out his phone to call the police, but was stunned when he saw how furiously the young guy was beating the old man. Finally, the beating stopped. The old man's blood began to drip in small drops onto the asphalt where shards of glass were already scattered. Suddenly, the guy asked if the old man was Park-chan from the Manhwa group. The old man replied that he did not understand what his offender was talking about and was trying to catch his breath. The guy said that it was quite difficult for him to find him only from old photographs, and advised that if the old man wanted to lie low, he should have hidden better. Comparing the elderly man's face with the photograph in the document, the guy said that no matter where he hid, he would follow him even to hell. After this, Kang Pil-do swung his fist again and ordered the old man to immediately tell him where all those who killed his mother were. Kang Pil-do said that no matter where the old man hid, he would follow him to hell, after which he swung his fist and asked where all those who killed his mother were. A minibus stood alone near an inconspicuous building on the edge of the city. Someone was carefully trying to wash away the traces of blood that had stained the floor. The spacious hangar was completely filled with evidence of a recent crime. Several people in special suits using various chemicals tried to clean up here. The water in the plastic buckets turned red from the large amount of blood. However, this did not stop the cleaning from continuing. The man in the black suit walked around to supervise the work of his subordinates. It was the head of a subsidiary of the Xiongwa group called Xiongwa. Cleaning Pak-chan was unhappy with his workers and said that at this rate, they would not be able to finish the job in a month. Looking around, the old man asked the workers to check that there was not a drop of blood left anywhere, and threatened that if they did not manage to do it today, they would not get home. One of the workers greeted the old man and was surprised that he was there. The old man sympathized with the guy that he had gotten a dusty job again. The guy confirmed this and suggested that even at the table, their customers behaved like pigs because they created such a mess here. The older men were surprised at where the guy had so much dissatisfaction from, since it was not his first day in business, but he promised to personally talk to his superiors. After that, the old man said that he wanted to find out something from the guy, after which he slapped him on the stomach as if hinting at something. Smiling slyly at the elderly man, he directly asked where the dead men's belongings were. The guy was surprised that the old man was still doing this and threatened that he would go straight to hell. Not believing these tales, the old man began to leave, saying for the last time that the real hell was here. After this, the old man left the hangar and headed towards a minibus parked nearby. Suddenly, the car shook, and a dull sound indicated that something heavy had been thrown into the trunk. The bald man stood to the side and watched his subordinates, ordering them to throw more gently so as not to damage the car. After some time, the subordinates reported that this was the last body. The man was glad to hear this and ordered to quickly finish this and leave. One of the men called someone and said that all the corpses had been loaded and would soon be placed in the funeral home. Pak Chon was watching all this. Suddenly, the trunk of the minibus opened, and several bloody corpses appeared before the eyes. It was Pak Chon who opened the trunk, and now he was carefully examining its contents. The old man was surprised at how many people were killed and assumed that now a whole mountain of corpses would have to be burned. After that, he began to smile slyly. Bowing his head and folding his hands in front of him, the elderly man began to ask the Lord to rest their souls so that the burden would not darken their path. After this, the old man began to remove a gold ring from the finger of one of the corpses, saying that he would take better care of it. An elderly man used an ancient method and bit the ring to check if it was really gold. A moment later, he was glad that he was lucky and could not believe that this time the guys had money. Continuing to search the corpses, the old man justified himself by saying that, with his salary, he would have to pay off his gambling debts for many more years and therefore had to somehow get out of it. Suddenly, the old man was very surprised and thought that today luck was definitely on his side because he saw a real Rolex watch on the hand of the murdered man. Suddenly, someone approached the elderly man from behind and addressed him. The man looked back with fear. The next moment, a powerful blow hit the thief, causing him to lose his balance. Kong Pildu slapped his captive on the cheeks and asked him to finally wake up. The old man loudly asked why the main character behaved like that towards him. His screams echoed throughout the empty corridor. Kong Pildu asked the elderly man to answer him directly for what, according to the documents, he received a cash benefit of 2 billion. The main character added that this company would not do something just like that, and therefore demanded that Pak Chon answer what he did to receive such a huge sum. Coming to his senses, the old man replied that he had worked like a horse for the company for 30 years and therefore deserved such a reward. The main character thought that this was not true and immediately punished the elderly man for lying with a loud blow to the face. Pak Chon started to get angry, and assuming that the guy came for money, started shouting loudly about how he had already spent everything on paying off debts and didn't have a penny left. The elderly man continued to say that it was impossible to live like that and suggested that the guy find a job and earn money through honest labor instead of robbing a feeble old man. It seemed that Kang Pildu was tired of the old man's loud talk, so he picked up the tape. Having torn off a small piece, the main character securely sealed the old man's mouth so that he would no longer make so much noise. After that, Kang Pildu looked at the uncooperative old man for a while, as if preparing him for what would happen next. The next moment, the main character hit Pak Chon in the face with all his might, and if it weren't for the tape, his screams could have been heard. Kang Pildu continued to explain to the old man in a clear manner that he needed to be honest with him. The cramped room away from prying eyes was perfect for this. For some time, preventive work continued, thanks to which Kang Pildu hoped to get answers to all his questions. Grabbing the old man by the hair, Kang Pildu asked the old man to nod his head if he planned to answer his question. To this, Pak Chon only mumbled something, making it clear that he had no intention of cooperating with the main character. The guy was not surprised at all because he did not expect the old man to tell him everything honestly. Then the main character decided to resort to another method and headed to the opposite end of the room. There were several wooden blocks leaning against the wall. Kang Pildu took one of them. The main character began to carefully examine it, thinking about whether it would suit him in order to make his idea a reality. The next moment, Kang Pildu hit the wall hard with his stick, and for some reason, the wall shattered into pieces. Taking a sharp piece of a wooden shelf, the main characters went to the old man, who was very scared when he saw this. Without any hesitation, Kang Pildu swung his weapon. It seemed like the guy would kill the old man right then and there. A moment later, Kang Pil-du thrust a sharp stick deep into Pak Chon's leg, causing a fountain of blood to gush out. The old man's loud moans, which replaced the scream, spread throughout the abandoned house. Chon's wounded leg and staining the floor. The elderly man was breathing heavily and trying his best to cope with the incredible pain that was burning through his leg. Kang Pil-du dialed the ambulance number on his phone and then told the old man that if he delayed, he would die from blood loss. After this, the main character put the phone nearby, making it clear that as soon as he gets answers to his questions, he will immediately let Pak Chon go. Next, Kang Pil-du picked up a chair and pulled it towards her with a terrible creaking sound. The guy intended to sit down next to the old man and ask him about everything, because he thought that he was already ready to tell everything. Sitting down on a chair, the main character again asked Pak Chon to nod his head if he wanted to live. Immediately, a rustling sound was heard, which indicated that the elderly man had finally nodded his head. After this, the guy handed the old man a document with photographs of the company's former employees and asked which of them had given the order, asking him to name every single one of them. Pak Chon glared at Kang Pil-du as if he didn't want to talk to him despite all the boy's arguments. The main character said that such a loser as the old man was definitely not able to do everything alone. The guy looked angrily at the elderly man and asked who was standing above him, because he was sure that Pak Chon should have known this. Pak Chon nevertheless looked at the documents and began to carefully study the photographs from the list. A familiar name immediately caught his eye, causing the old man to begin breathing heavily, clearly nervous. The main character asked Pak Chon to watch carefully, but the old man had already begun to remember the past. For some time, several men in black suits beat Pak Chon severely with their feet for his misbehavior. Everything stopped when someone's voice ordered the men to stop, because that was already enough. After this, the men began to leave hastily, leaving the beaten Pak Chon lying on the floor. Another man began to approach the old man, who did not understand how such an experienced man could be so careless about his work. Stopping at a pool of blood, the unknown man continued to say that Pak Chon knew better than anyone what happened to those who touched the company's property. The old man looked at the man and, asking for forgiveness, justified himself by saying that the moneylenders had threatened to kill him if he did not repay the debt again. Holding a gold watch in his hand, the man agreed that it was a difficult situation because the old man had no choice but to die here or on the street at the hands of usurers. The man continued to say that if he were in the old man's place, he would also do everything to survive. After that, he threw Pak Chon a gold watch and asked what he would do next, since selling it cheaply would not make the debt go away. The man continued to say that he would give the old man one easy job, and if he did it, he would pay him a lot of money. Pak Chon immediately asked what kind of job it was. The unknown person explained that there was one case that was not an official assignment but rather a secret mission. After this, the man clarified that they would deliver one thing to the old man, and he would have to quietly get rid of it. Pak Chon was very surprised by this and asked what kind of thing it would be, not believing that even the company did not know about it. Suddenly, an unknown man silently hit the old man in the face so that he would not ask unnecessary questions. The old man's memories were cut short when Kang Pil-du slapped him in the face, as the old man did not respond for a long time. After this, Pak Chon began to moan loudly as if saying that he was ready to cooperate with the main character. Kang Pil-du said that in a little while the old man would not even be able to raise his head due to loss of blood, so he had to act faster. The guy showed the documents again and asked the old man to look at them again, saying that everyone on this list was fired on the same day as him. The protagonist continued to ask which of these people was the organizer and whether he was even on the list. Pak Chon knew that this person was on the list, but he still couldn't bring himself to point him out. After some time, the elderly man lowered his head, resigned to his situation, and now he was definitely ready to tell everything. Finally, Pak Chon revealed that a man named Yu Osok, who also worked at the company, was planning to kill the lady of the Manhwa group and hired him to do so. Looking angrily at the photo of his new target, Kang Pil-du wondered where he could be now. In the lobby of the main office of the company's Manhwa group, someone was actively telling what happened to him at stake. A bald man bearing his belly said that some punks tried to stab him with a knife. He was indignant that today's youth had completely lost their fear and did not understand who should not be rude to. The rest of the company's employees, who became involuntary listeners to this story, were very surprised by their new noisy colleagues. The bald man continued to tell that in that situation, he fearlessly stuck his stomach out, telling the hooligans that they were being bullied and the knife would get stuck in their skin. As a result, those scoundrels ran away, which made the man laugh. In addition to loud conversations, the new workers did not shy away from drinking alcohol. One of the men laughed loudly at his friend's funny story and kindly called him a psycho. Suddenly, someone from behind turned to the bald man and grabbed him by the shoulder. The latter did not understand why they were addressing him. Unknown swung his fist hard to check how strong the new worker's stomach was. The next moment, So Nambong hit the man hard, causing him to lose his balance. The man could not stay on his feet, and clutching his stomach, fell to his knees, trying to endure the terrible pain. The male comrades immediately jumped to their feet, asking the guy who he was and intending to teach him a lesson for his insolence. So Nambong didn't answer this question and instead attacked the man who was already approaching him. But that was not the end. The guy deftly transferred his body weight to his other leg in order to attack the second opponent. With a precise kick to the face, he managed to hit another noisy worker. The man was unable to do anything to resist this and began to fall to the floor. The men lay on the floor, writhing in pain, and no longer tried to show off their skills. So Nambong, looking at this, decided to leave for his own business. Suddenly, the bald man, being very angry at the guy, asked if he knew whose subordinates they were. The next moment, So Nambong pressed the man's head to the floor with his foot. The guy answered directly that he was not interested in this at all, which is why the ill-mannered workers were called pathetic worms. Suddenly, someone from behind So Nambong spoke and ordered him to stay put. It was Kang Taegu, who was walking accompanied by his secretary. The guy was very unhappy and asked what kind of impudent guy beat up his guys in broad daylight. Looking at his subordinates lying on the floor, the third son noted that the guy had extraordinary skills. Nambong if he thought that his older brother would protect him. So Nambong calmly explained that the hallway should be kept silent, and these guys were still unfamiliar with the corporate rules, and he was just explaining that. Kang Taegu was surprised that the guy beat people up so harshly for talking loudly, and thought that was why they were considered a bandit organization. The guy continued to say that in other companies they drank coffee during working hours and slept during lunch. After that, he began to remember where this had happened, and said that something similar had definitely happened in Silicon Valley. The third son enthusiastically suggested that they also reach the world level, since they still had so much to learn. The guy then said that it was unacceptable to brutally beat people for chatting because they were all one family. While adjusting So Nambong's tie, the third son asked what was normal. The family would start waving their fists from the very morning. After this, Kang Taegu remembered So Nambong's words about the hall being the face of the company. The third son continued to speak angrily, saying that this meant that the guy's behavior was spoiling the mood of the place. Seo Nambong calmly replied that the silence in the hall was a rule that was personally established by director Kong Cha-woo. Hearing this, Kang Taegu lowered his head as he was tired of hearing about his older brother everywhere. The third son turned to the guy and said that then he would also come up with rules. Looking at So Nambong with a crazy look, he said that anyone who dared to contradict him in the future would die immediately. For a while there was absolute silence. A portrait of the company's first chairman, Kan Il-do, looked down at the guys from the wall. Kang Taegu asked if the guy was aware that the company's rules were set by a certain group of people who were appointed as the chairman. Therefore, he should not have hoped too much that his older brother would cover for him, because not only in him, but also in the third son flowed the blood of the chairman. Seo Nambong clenched his teeth tightly, trying to contain his emotions, and silently looked at Kang Taegu. The third son watched the boy closely, trying to catch him making a mistake. So Nambong clenched his fist tightly, as if he wanted to pounce on the new director right then and there. For a few more seconds, the guys looked at each other, trying to understand what they should prepare for. Still, So Nambong stepped aside to let the third son pass further. Kang Taegu silently walked forward. The subordinates bowed respectfully to him, but not all did so. So Nambong seemed to look after his third son, realizing that he couldn't do anything because his position was insufficient. Kang Taegu praised the boy for making the right decision and ordered him to work harder. The third son and the secretary silently approached the elevator and began to wait for its arrival. The guy carefully thought over what had happened. Finally, the elevator descended to the first floor, and the door smoothly slid apart, letting people in. Kang Taegu and his subordinate entered the elevator, after which the guy said the number 15. The man who was about to press the button with the number of the floor he needed was surprised when he heard this number. He looked at his boss with incomprehension, asking what he was talking about since this wasn't their floor. Kang Taegu replied with a dissatisfied look that it was the number of people in the hall who did not bow their heads to him. After that, he asked why his secretary needed eyes if he didn't even notice how they were looking at them sideways. For a while there was silence in the elevator, and in the meantime it had already risen to the 19th floor. The man said that to some extent they themselves already guessed what position they occupied in the main office. Kang Tae-gu agreed with this, but no, I don't think it's that bad, so they'll have to clean out not only the office, but the whole company. The secretary looked away and thoughtfully repeated the boss's words, not believing that they would be able to do this. Silence reigned in the elevator again, and in the meantime, it had already risen to the 20th floor. The door began to smoothly slide apart to the sides, allowing people to exit. Kang Tae-gu asked what Kang Pil-do was doing now. The secretary replied that apparently the main character was still studying those who had retired. The third son was very surprised by his brother's slowness. The guy was indignant because Kang Pil-do was messing around with all sorts of small pretzels, because it was obvious who in the company had taken over his mother's share. That was why Kang Tae-gu hated getting involved with government officials. The third son admitted that he was stupid when he trusted his younger brother and thought that he could take over the Manhwa group. Therefore, he felt that it was necessary to urgently make his first move. The secretary asked his boss if he was confident in his decision and whether it was too dangerous to act without any safety net. Approaching the door of Kang Tae's office, he replied that he would deal with it himself and that his subordinate should prepare some smart guys for him. The man agreed with this. After this, the secretary turned the door handle to open it for his boss. When the door opened completely, it turned out that there was already someone in the office. A bald, elderly man was sitting in the office like he owned the place and drinking tea. Kang Tae-gu was surprised that the director arrived earlier than he expected. The old man replied that he could not afford to be late for the meeting the boy had invited. In that case, the third son suggested getting straight to the point. The director agreed with this, after which the secretary closed the door so that no one would interfere with this conversation. The casino was crowded today. The administrators tried their best to please their visitors, and the security guards never relaxed for a moment, maintaining order in the establishment. Slot machines have always been popular, as evidenced by the numerous rows of these devices, but given the time of day, there were few people here. But the man in the black suit preferred this particular entertainment to others. He confidently pressed the buttons of the slot machine, relying on his luck. The slots began to spin quickly on the screen, lining up in neat rows of bright pictures. The man hid his hand in his trouser pocket as if he was trying to find something in it. Suddenly, 3 sevens lined up on the screen. The system immediately loudly congratulated the player on winning the jackpot. Visitors and casino workers immediately turned around to look at this, not believing that someone had managed to win the main prize. People began to approach the slot machine where the lucky guy was sitting. He continued playing. The CCTV camera immediately turned its gaze to the winning slot machine, and the administrator asked to immediately check seat number 49. The men who were monitoring the casino's operations with cameras could not believe what had happened because a 0% win rate had been set for that period of time. The department head yelled at his subordinate so that he would talk less and instead check everything again. The man immediately obeyed. After that, he ordered to contact the team of programmers so that they could check whether other machines had worked. The casino owner thought that the winner had decided to play a joke on his territory. It was the former director of the Manhwa group, and now the boss of an underground casino named Yu Osok. The man ordered that this scoundrel be brought to him in order to look at his face. Meanwhile, the man managed to win another jackpot, which the machine loudly announced. People were surprised that the main prize was won again in the same place and thought that the establishment had rigged the victory. They continued to watch the man play. I guess it was lucky spots. Suddenly, men in black suits appeared in the hall and headed towards the lucky guy. They pushed the onlookers aside and ordered everyone to return to their seats, since the performance was over. The man sitting at the machine did not pay any attention to them and continued his game. The next moment, one of the men grabbed the guy by the shoulder, drawing his attention to himself. The man in the black suit rudely asked the guy to come with them because they wanted to see him upstairs, and that was all Kang Pil-do was waiting for. The man in the black suit rudely asked the guy to come with them because they wanted to see him upstairs, and that was all Kang Pil-do was waiting for. The main character looked angrily at the man, apparently not liking that he allowed himself to grab him by the shoulder. The guard was immediately taken aback and removed his hand while the guy had already gotten to his feet. The man clenched his fists and asked if the guy was looking for a fight. Kang Pil-do asked to be taken to the authorities since they wanted to see him. The boy agreed to go voluntarily. Meanwhile, the CCTV camera closely monitored what was happening in the hall. The man asked the main character not to worry because they were just checking something and said that if anything happened, this was the only way out. Therefore, the guard asked the guy not to even think about running away. Kang Pil-do replied that everything suited him. For some time they walked along a dark corridor, around the corner of which some people were already waiting. The main character conquered and found where he was told and didn't even think of resisting. The man who was sitting on the chair asked if this was the guy who needed to be checked. The second man confirmed this and said that it was he who had hit the jackpot 3 times in one game. After examining the guy, the man said that his face was normal and he didn't look like a drug addict. He didn't understand how he managed to break into the machines and ordered them to search him. The main character immediately spread his arms to the side, and one of the guards began to search him thoroughly. So far, nothing had been discovered, and so the chief ordered that every centimeter be searched. After that, he ordered to look more carefully at the trousers, because he saw that the main character was holding something in his pocket. The man felt uncomfortable doing this, and was unhappy that his colleague was always assigning this work to him. Still, he resigned himself and ordered Kang Pildu to spread his legs to the side. The underground casino worker continued to thoroughly search the main character. Suddenly, the man felt something hard in Kang Pildu's pants. He smiled slyly, and was surprised that the guy looked like a saint, but was actually a cowboy, after which he assumed that he had his eye on one of them. After this, the guard turned to his colleagues and said that the guy had a club in his pants. The men laughed at this and advised not to touch him too much, just in case. The man who searched the guy also laughed and agreed with this, suggesting that the main character could have had a spare one for him too. Suddenly, the man who was sitting on the chair started to get nervous and asked his colleague to stop because Kang Pildu had taken out something. The security guard turned to his colleagues and asked if the guy had been looking at him and had already taken off his pants. The man started shouting at him to be careful. Pildu and looked at him with a confused expression. It turned out that his colleagues weren't lying. The main character took out some kind of stick and was already swinging it to attack the man. The people who were watching the cameras immediately stopped their work and looked at the entrance door, behind which some strange sounds were heard. Behind the doors, dull sounds of blows and someone's screams were heard. This surprised the casino security guards, and they did not understand what could be happening there. Yu Osok also heard this noise and asked what was going on outside. In order to find out, he ordered his subordinates to go there and check everything. Suddenly, one of the workers, who was looking at the computer monitor at that time, approached him. He didn't know what was going on, so he thought it would be better for Yu Osoke to take a look at it himself. The guy pointed to the monitor that was responsible for the video from the CCTV camera at the entrance and explained that something was wrong with it. Yu Osok did not understand what the workers were telling him and asked what exactly the problem was. Meanwhile, the surveillance camera continued to record what was happening behind the door. The guy explained that if you looked closely at the screen, you could see that all the guards were beaten and lying on the floor, so it was unclear how to proceed. Yu Osok's face contorted in horror at what she saw. It seemed that he recognized the guy who was now standing behind the door and could not believe that he had actually come here. The next moment, someone knocked loudly on the iron door. This sound immediately attracted the attention of all the workers. One of the guards was about to press the button to open the electronic door, but suddenly Yu Osok shouted and ordered no one to move or do anything. The man immediately started calling someone while ordering his subordinates to wait and not open the door. Finally, the call was answered. Yu Osok, very worried, asked if his interlocutor could speak now. The person on the other end rudely replied that he had already warned the man not to call him again. Yu Osok started shouting that he didn't want to get involved in the company's affairs anymore, but the matter that had suddenly arisen was urgent. The man on this end decided to listen to the man who said that he had come to him after all. The interlocutor did not understand who exactly Yu Osok was talking about. The man, very nervously, explained that the son of the woman they killed had come to him. The person on this end couldn't believe it, but Kang Pildu was already standing at the door, waiting to be allowed in. Without waiting for any reaction, the main character knocked on the door again, holding his weapon in his hand. It was thanks to this club that several stocky men were now lying on the bloody floor, writhing in pain. The man ordered Yu Osoke to deal with the main character himself, and threatened that if Kang Pildu got to him, then not only the man but also his entire family would die. After that, he hung up the phone, lifeless, and Yu Osok was very close to his interlocutor to continue the conversation. In a fit of rage, he threw the phone on the floor, causing it to break and small shards of glass to scatter across the floor. Yu Osok started screaming loudly because he was treated like a servant and did not understand why the hell they were giving him orders. With the same anger, the man asked his subordinate where his thing was. The guy timidly answered that it was kept in the same drawer. Looking for something in the box, Yu Osok regretted that he had taken on that case, because it was precisely because of this that they could not leave him alone, although he had long since retired. A moment later, the man found what he was looking for. Two iron knuckles lay perfectly in the man's hands. Clutching his head and calming himself, Yosok said that it was time to end this. After that, he ordered his subordinate to open the door because he was already ready to meet the main character. The guard also complied and pressed the button on the electronic lock. The iron door began to open smoothly, allowing the uninvited guest to enter. The door opened in front of Kang Taegu, and he carefully examined everyone present in the room. The guy slowly walked towards his chair, surprised that everyone was already there. The third son took his place at the head of the table and asked if he could sit there. The people who were already in the office reacted negatively to this decision, but no one dared to express dissatisfaction. Kang Taegu noticed this and asked what was wrong with the men's faces, because he saw that they were very unhappy about something. One of them looked at the guy with disdain and suggested that the third son did not quite understand what kind of place it was. Kang Taegu agreed with this, explaining that he had not been in the company for long and had not yet settled in, so he did not know if he could sit in this chair. Several men began to get very indignant, saying that the guy knew everything perfectly well and that only the chairman could sit in that place. The bald old man turned to his colleagues and reminded them that this was a meeting room, so he asked them not to make a fuss over some chair. The older man went on to say that the real question was how long the chair would remain empty. The men immediately began to whisper among themselves, and the old man continued to say that it was unlikely that they had gathered here to look at each other. Still, he turned to Kang Taegu and asked why he had summoned the entire governing council. The guy was surprised by Director Chan's insight and replied that he had guessed that he would not tolerate disagreements. After that, he said that he would like to discuss future companies among themselves. One of the men was very surprised by this wording and, turning to the old man, said that it would be the end of them all if Kanchavu found out about this. Another manager said that the fact that they were gathered here was the same as declaring war. The man reminded Director Chan that they had problems with the company's shares and they had agreed not to make any more noise, so he suggested that the old man leave the meeting. Suddenly, Kang Taegu knocked on the table, drawing everyone's attention to himself. The third son said that he did not expect his older colleagues to be such cowards. After that, the guy asked how long ago Kang Chawu's gang took over the Manhwa group, although it was the gentleman from the board of directors who raised this company to its current heights. The third son continued to say that despite the above, some greenhorns suddenly came and declared that they would take over the company. Kang Taegu asked if his colleagues would just stand and watch as their companies were taken away. Those present seriously thought about these words. Unexpectedly, the third son suggested that those present speak on the frequency. Everyone immediately began to listen attentively to the guy. Kang Taegu asked what the men thought made them different from his brothers. It was just one thing. This thing was the relationship with the chairman, Kang Il-do, and therefore Kang Taegu stated that he was willing to become the link between the management and the company. All those present immediately began to talk among themselves, not being sure of the success of this undertaking. Only Director Chan remained silent and adjusted his glasses, preparing to say his piece. The old man thanked Kang Taegu for being willing to support them, but the company was not a place that could be simply given or taken away as it had been before. The older man continued to say that there were strict rules here too. The third son answered briefly that he was well aware of this. The guy decided to share with his colleagues the only way to defeat his older brothers, which was the shares of the company left by his late mother. Hearing this, Director Chang smiled imperceptibly, as if he was happy that everything was going according to his plan. With a menacing look, Kang Taeg promised that he would find the lost shares for the managers if only they believed in him and supported him. The next moment, the lonely claps of an elderly man echoed throughout the room. Everyone present immediately looked at the old man, not believing that he dared to openly support his third son. Director Zhang explained that Kang Taegu was willing to be their support, and so they all should support him as well. After this, the old man asked if he was wrong. Perhaps someone present did not agree, but decided, like everyone else, to applaud the third son for his wonderful speech. The spacious conference room was immediately filled with loud sounds of applause, which were intended for one person. Kang Taegu thought that, thanks to Director Zhang, more than half of the governing council had taken his side. Now the most difficult thing remained for the guy, namely, to find these lost shares of the company that disappeared somewhere after the death of his mother. The guy decided to completely entrust the solution to this issue to Khan Pildu, because now it was his turn to do what he owed him. The iron doors opened smoothly, and the main character was finally able to see his goal, for which the men lying on the floor in their own blood sacrificed their health. Seeing the guy, Yu Osak rudely asked why he was knocking on the door, since they would have opened at the right moment anyway. The man tightly clutched the knuckle duster in his hand and threatened to make Kang Pil-du regret his visit.